Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. If you ever find yourself driving through Pine Hollow after midnight, don't stop for anything. Not a broken down car. Not a figure waving at the side of the road. And never, ever stop if you see a house that wasn't there yesterday. Caleb Mercer didn't know that rule. He learned it the hard way. It started the night he decided to leave the city. Caleb had been through a lot. His younger brother's disappearance still hung over him like a shadow he could never shake. That had been 8 years ago, a camping trip gone wrong. Everyone said the woods swallowed Sam whole. No clues, no leads. Just a tent zipped up from the inside and nothing but dead silence where a boy should have been. But Caleb couldn't let go. He told himself it wasn't obsession, just grief. He quit his job, packed everything he owned into a rust-red Jeep, and began driving west. Maybe, he thought, distance would dull the pain. Maybe space would finally smother the questions that clawed at him night after night. At 12:43 a.m., tired and barely able to keep his eyes open, Caleb saw the sign. Pineolo 2 miles. He didn't remember seeing it on the map. No GPS signal, no radio. Just the distant creak of pine trees bending under the weight of wind, and a kind of wrongness that prickled at the edges of his senses. It was like the road narrowed without moving, like the forest on either side leaned in, listening. He should have kept driving, but then came the detour sign, Road Slosade, USE Aleti Arnata Roden. That's when he noticed the house. It stood to his left, 3 stories tall, crooked in its design like a house drawn by a child who didn't understand balance. Dark green shutters, a turret that leaned slightly, and every window open like a mouth waiting to breathe. There were no lights, no mailbox, no address, just a thin gravel driveway wending into shadow. And yet, something about it screamed his name. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear. It was the kind that wriths under your skin, that twists your guts into knots. He told himself it was nothing, just exhaustion. But his foot slowed on the gas. The driveway was calling him. And Caleb, a man who had spent 8 years wishing for some kind of sign, didn't think twice before turning in. The gravel cracked beneath the tires, sounding too loud in the silence. The woods around him stood still, frozen, as if waiting for something to happen. He parked near the porch. There was no car, no sign of life. The door stood ajar, a thin slice of darkness grinning at him. He stepped out of the Jeep. That was his first mistake. The moment his boots touched the ground, the wind stopped. He hadn't noticed the insects before, but now he noticed their absence. No chirping, no buzzing, just the rasp of the breeze brushing through branches that no longer swayed. Caleb looked up. The 3rd-floor window directly above the door was glowing faintly. He hadn't seen that from the road. It flickered, once, twice, then went black. Somewhere inside, a floorboard creaked. He should have turned back. Instead, he stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned under his weight like it hadn't felt a footstep in years. He pushed the door open. The scent hit him first, wet earth, rust, and something sweet, not like candy, like decay pretending to be candy. Inside, the house was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into bones. He called out. Hello. Silence answered. Then came the faintest sound, a child's laugh, high, mirthless. It echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. Caleb felt his hands clench. He should have left, but his brother's face flashed in his mind. Young, freckled, always smiling. And that laugh, it sounded like Sam's laugh. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him. The sound echoed down the halls like a gunshot. Caleb spun around, heart racing, fingers scrambling at the knob. Locked. He tried the light switch. Nothing. Darkness hugged the walls, thick and suffocating. He pulled out his phone. 1% battery. No service. He turned on the flashlight, and the house changed. What had been an empty hallway seconds ago now bore picture frames. Dozens of them, all crooked. all shattered. But each one held the same photograph, a child standing in front of the house. This house. The child was smiling, but the face was scratched out. Not blurred, scratched, ripped, torn. Every single photo ruined in the same way. He walked deeper into the house, flashlight trembling in his hand. The hallway led to a living room, furniture under white sheets, dust swirling in the beam of light. And then a piano, old, wooden, with keys the color of bone. The sheet music resting on it was blank, and yet someone was playing it. Soft notes floated through the room, as though the keys were pressing themselves. Caleb stepped closer. The music stopped. In its place came a whisper, so soft he barely caught it. "Why did you leave me?" His breath caught in his throat. He knew that voice. Sam, he spun around no one. Then he saw the footprints. Small, muddy footprints leading from the piano toward the stairs. They weren't there seconds ago, and they were fresh. He followed them. Each step he took, the house groaned louder. Walls whispered things he couldn't quite hear. Air grew colder. The air didn't smell like dust anymore. It smelled like a hospital room left to rot. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched longer than it should have. The footprints ended at the third door on the right. The door opened on its own. Inside, a child's bedroom. But something was wrong. The toys were too old. The posters on the wall advertised movies from the 1960s. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, except the bed. The bed was neatly made, as if someone was still sleeping in it. The room was freezing. He stepped in. Behind him, the door shut quietly. Then the closet door creaked open. Not fast, slow. He turned the light toward it. Inside, nothing but coats and shadows. Until they moved. A shape unfolded from within, child-sized, head tilted too far to the left, eyes too wide, too dark. "Found you," it said. Caleb stumbled backward. The figure stepped forward, feet silent on the wood, mouth stretched into a grin too wide for its face. It wasn't Sam, but it wore Sam's shirt. The same one he was wearing the day he vanished. Caleb ran, down the hallway, down the stairs. The house shook with his footsteps. Walls cracked, lights exploded, and behind him, the laughter, louder now. Not just one voice, dozens. Children laughing, screaming, whispering in unison. He reached the front door, still locked. He turned. They were on the stairs. Children with no eyes. Children missing limbs. Children who had clearly been dead for decades, and each one whispered the same word, "Stay." He kicked at the door. Once. Twice. On the third kick, it opened. He stumbled out into the night, lungs burning, heart pounding. He didn't stop running until he reached the Jeep. He turned the key. The engine didn't start. Again, nothing. Then he looked up at the house. It was gone. Just trees. Like it had never been there. His phone buzzed. Somehow still alive. One new photo. No sender. He opened it. It was the same house. But this time he was in the window. Third floor. Staring out. Mouth wide open. Eyes black. He dropped the phone. Started the engine. This time, it worked. He drove like a man possessed. Back to the highway. Back to civilization. Back to safety. But Pine Hollow wasn't on the map anymore. And his phone still shows that photo. He's tried to delete it. It always comes back. And some nights, when he's alone, he hears the piano again. Playing softly, calling him back. He knows better now. But the thing is, that house, it's still waiting. And now it knows his name. The nightmares came first. Caleb hadn't slept through a night in over a week, and when sleep did come, it brought with it the house, the crooked green monster nestled in the woods of Pine Hollow that no longer existed. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, ears ringing with the ghostly echo of piano notes played by invisible hands. But it wasn't just the dreams. The house was following him. He first noticed it on the 5th night after he fled. He'd checked into a cheap roadside motel in Ridgewater, a dusty little town where the curtains never moved and the staff never blinked. The kind of place where even the cockroaches looked like they didn't want to be there. He told himself it was temporary, just a stop to catch his breath. But when he opened the curtains that morning, heart still thudding from the latest nightmare, something stopped him cold. Across the road stood a house. Not the same one. Not exactly. This one was smaller, 2 stories, no turret, but it had the same rotting green paint, the same open windows, and the door, that cursed, slightly open door, it was grinning at him again. He blinked. The house was gone. Only trees now. No sign of foundation, no flattened grass, nothing but wind and doubt. He didn't pack his things. He just grabbed the keys and left. Caleb kept driving. No destination, just movement. Motion was safety. If he kept moving, the house couldn't find him. Or so he thought. It wasn't long before the second sighting. He was in a diner, halfway across the state, sipping bitter coffee and trying to keep the tremble in his hands from knocking the cup over. The waitress, an old woman with eyes too bright and lips too still, asked him if he was headed home. He told her no. Told her he didn't have one. She smiled, leaned close, and whispered, "Maybe you just left it behind." He didn't even ask what she meant. He stood to leave. That's when he saw it again. Through the diner window, across the empty parking lot, behind a thin fog that hadn't been there moments earlier. The house. This time, it was gray, shutters closed, roof slanted. But it was the same shape, the same windows, the same feeling like something watching him through the glass, daring him to come back. He ran. But the house didn't stop following him. Each day it looked different. Bigger, smaller, old, modern, but always the same bones. Always the same chill that crawled into his spine whenever he saw it. And every time, it was just barely there, gone the second someone else turned to look. A mirage with teeth. He started taking photos, desperate to catch it. Sometimes, he'd capture a blur, a dark smudge where the house should have been. One time, he caught a full image, clear as day, but when he zoomed in, something in the 3rd floor window moved and blinked. Then the photo deleted itself. That was when the man began to appear. The first time Caleb saw him, he thought it was a hallucination. It was early morning, just past dawn, and Caleb was sitting on a bus bench in an empty town called Finchley. Cold wind bit through his jacket as he rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the last of the nightmare. Then he looked up and saw him, a man in a long, black coat, standing perfectly still on the sidewalk across the street, watching him. He looked normal enough, pale face, neatly combed black hair, no expression, just wrong. Caleb stood. The man didn't move. Not an inch, but something about him made Caleb's chest tighten. It wasn't the stillness. It wasn't even the intensity of the stare. It was the fact that the man cast no shadow. The sun was behind him, strong and sharp, casting long lines across the sidewalk, but not from the man. He just stood there, untouched by light. Caleb stepped back. The man tilted his head. Then Caleb blinked, and he was gone. Vanished like smoke. The second time was worse. He was at a gas station 2 towns over, trying to calm himself with music and sugar-loaded snacks. He caught movement in the reflection of the freezer glass. Turned, and there he was. Again, closer this time. The man didn't blink, didn't breathe. And again, no shadow. Caleb didn't wait. He dropped the soda and ran out, tires screaming as he tore onto the road. No destination, just speed. And that night, he didn't stop driving until his fuel gauge threatened to strand him in the middle of nowhere. He found a rest stop and parked at the edge of a small forest. The house didn't show up that night, but the man did. Caleb woke in the driver's seat, shivering despite the blanket draped over him. He blinked against the dim glow of dawn and saw the man, standing just 10 feet away, closer than ever. Still, silent, staring, no fog, no tricks, just the man, pale face, empty eyes, and the faintest flicker of a grin beginning to stretch across his lips. Caleb's scream died in his throat as he fumbled for the keys. The Jeep roared to life, and he backed away, spinning gravel, engine howling. He didn't stop until the figure was a speck in the distance. But now the man began showing up in mirrors, storefront glass, the chrome of parked cars, a reflection here, a face there, always the same man, always without a shadow, and always watching. But the worst part, the truly terrifying part, was when Caleb finally asked someone about him. He was in a library, tucked deep in a forgotten corner of a half-deserted town, searching through folklore books, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what he'd seen. The librarian was a hunched old man with watery eyes and a voice that sounded like it had to crawl out of a grave every time he spoke. When Caleb described the man, his stillness, his stare, the lack of shadow, the librarian stopped moving. Then he leaned close and whispered, "He follows those who step where they shouldn't." Caleb's blood went cold. The man continued, "He doesn't walk. He waits. And when the waiting ends, you'll be inside." "Inside what?" Caleb asked. The librarian didn't answer. But that night, Caleb dreamed of the house again. Only this time, he wasn't watching it from the outside. He was inside. Locked in the third-floor room, hands pressed against the glass, screaming soundlessly at a version of himself standing in the yard. And behind him, in the mirror over the dresser, stood the man with no shadow. Closer now, always closer. The next morning, Caleb found a mark on his forearm, 3 small, crescent-shaped scars. They weren't there before, and they pulsed faintly, like something under the skin was moving. He tried to stay awake, but sleep always came, and with it, the house. And with the house, the man, always in the background, always watching. But now, he was beginning to smile. The body has its limits, and Caleb Mercer had reached his. After 13 straight days of poor sleep, paranoia, and a hunger he couldn't seem to kill, his reflection no longer looked like his own. Sunken eyes, trembling hands. A look of permanent dread hanging over his features like fog over the highway. He couldn't remember the last real meal he ate. He couldn't remember the last conversation that didn't involve whispers and warnings. But worst of all, he couldn't trust his own sleep anymore. Because now, when he closed his eyes, he didn't just dream, he traveled. It wasn't like before. This wasn't ordinary dreaming. This time, it was different. He didn't feel like he was imagining the house. He felt like he was inside it, and it knew. He tried everything. Sleeping pills, no caffeine, staying in brightly lit places, setting alarms every 10 minutes. None of it worked. No matter what he tried, once he dozed off, even for a moment, he'd snap awake somewhere else. Not the motel, not the Jeep, but inside that house. And each time, he awoke deeper within it. At first, it was the hallway, then the bedroom, then the attic. Now, it was the basement. And the basement wasn't empty. He'd awaken on the cold stone floor, gasping, shivering, his skin coated with a layer of filth he could smell. And around him, darkness, the kind that didn't wait for his flashlight, the kind that swallowed light whole. He couldn't see his hands, couldn't hear anything but the drip, drip of water falling from pipes he couldn't locate. But one sound cut through, a voice, childlike, familiar. Caleb. It was always just a whisper, but it carried through the black like a scream. And every time he heard it, he'd feel something brush against his arm, a hand. Small, cold. The first few nights, he would scream himself awake. But then came the night he couldn't wake up. It started the same. He nodded off inside a diner bathroom, after splashing water on his face, and then there it was again. That smell. That basement. The cold. Only this time, he didn't wake up when he tried. He slapped himself, bit his arm, screamed, but his body didn't respond, because he wasn't in his body anymore. He was in someone else's. He could feel it. The arms were shorter. The clothes too tight. There was a bandage around his left hand, crusted with something dry and flaking. He ran his hands along the wall, feeling for an exit, a door, something, and that's when he found the mirror. It shouldn't have been there. Not in a basement like this. Not in a place without light. But it was there, looming taller than him, frame carved with symbols he couldn't recognize. He stepped closer, and that's when the horror set in. The reflection looking back wasn't his. It was his brother, Sam, 8 years old, alive, terrified. But then the face changed. The eyes turned black. The mouth stretched too wide, and Sam's voice came from that mouth. But it didn't belong to him anymore. "You left me." Caleb stumbled back. The mirror cracked. Once, twice, 3 times, like something was trying to punch through. And then the laughter started. "Hi, Reedy." Dozens of voices in perfect sync, and something moved behind him. He turned too late. The shape slammed into him. Cold, wet hands grabbing his face, his chest, his neck, pulling him down, into the floor, into the dark. And then he woke up, back in the diner bathroom, gasping, shaking, sweat pouring off him like rain. But his reflection in the bathroom mirror was wrong. It was smiling. He wasn't. He took a step back. The reflection didn't. It just stood there, smiling. Then it waved, and vanished. The glass went black. He ran from that diner and never looked back. For days, he drove without stopping. The lines on the road became his heartbeat. The hum of the engine his only sense of time. He stayed awake by blasting static through the speakers and chewing on ice. And he made one rule: never sleep inside. He pulled over at campsites, abandoned truck stops, even open fields. But each time he dozed, the result was the same. Back in the house, back in that body, back in the dark. And every time, it got harder to leave. His limbs would feel heavier. The house would fight to hold him. The laughter would get closer. And the mirror would show more. Images that weren't just of him or Sam, but people he didn't recognize. A woman with her eyes sewn shut. A man bleeding from the ears. A child scratching the walls with bones. They all stared at him, as if waiting, as if he was next. One night, after 2 hours of desperate driving, Caleb pulled over in front of a small chapel in the middle of nowhere. The stained glass was cracked. The sign had no name, but it had one light on, and inside someone was waiting for him. A priest, old, with trembling hands and hollow eyes. He didn't ask who Caleb was. He didn't seem surprised to see him. "You've seen it," the priest said. Caleb didn't answer. "You've slept there." Still, Caleb said nothing. But the man continued. "The house follows those who've left a piece of themselves behind. It was never built. It was born." "What is it?" Caleb asked, voice like sandpaper. The priest looked toward the altar. "It's not a place. It's every place. It finds the empty parts of you and fills them. And once it has enough of you," he didn't finish. Caleb leaned in. "My brother. Is he alive?" A pause. "Then, not in the way you remember." Caleb's voice cracked. "Then what am I supposed to do?" The priest finally looked him in the eyes. "You don't sleep. You don't stop. And when the man with no shadow comes to your door, you don't let him in." Caleb's heart stopped. "What? He'll knock soon," the priest said. "He always does. And once he crosses the threshold," the man's gaze dropped to the floor. "There is no leaving." Caleb left that night. He didn't thank the priest. Didn't even look back, because in his pocket was a note. He didn't remember putting it there. He didn't even remember the priest handing it to him. But it was folded in 4, stained at the corners, and written in tiny, scratchy handwriting. It said only one thing: stop looking for what you already left behind. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. But as he drove past mile marker 77, something flickered in his side mirror, a shape, human, standing in the middle of the road, still and smiling, with no shadow. It happened on a Tuesday. Caleb would always remember that. Not because Tuesdays held any special meaning, but because it was the day the knocking started. The night before had been mercifully quiet. No dreams of the house, no whispers in the dark, no mirror with teeth. He'd parked the Jeep behind an old barn outside a town so small it didn't even appear on most maps. The stars overhead were thick and heavy, and for once, sleep found him gently. But when the sun rose, and he sat up bleary, eyed in the driver's seat. The Jeep's windows were fogged. From the inside, and on the windshield, written in a child's uneven scrawl, were the words "Open Thdur." He didn't. Instead, he started the engine, peeled out from under the barn's shadow, and didn't stop until he was 3 towns over. But that was only the beginning. That night, the first knock came. He was in a roadside motel, room 12, door sticking, carpet damp. The kind of place that felt like it had absorbed screams over the decades. He wedged a chair under the doorknob, set up a circle of salt. He didn't even know if that worked, but fear doesn't care about logic, and sat in the corner with a flashlight and a knife he'd picked up at a hardware store 2 weeks earlier. At 3:03 a.m. the knock came, not frantic, not angry, just calm, a polite knock, like a neighbor dropping in for sugar. 3 short raps. Caleb held his breath. The knocking stopped. He didn't move. Then came the voice, Caleb. No yelling, no threats. Just his name, spoken softly. With the familiarity of someone who'd known him his whole life, he stayed absolutely still. More knocking. This time louder, but still patient. The voice again, a little closer. You left the door open once, remember? He didn't respond, didn't blink, he didn't even breathe. Then silence, long, stretching silence that made his ears ring. He waited. 30 minutes passed, then an hour. He finally allowed himself to exhale. But when he turned his head slightly toward the bathroom mirror, the figure was already there. Not in the room. In the reflection. The man in black. The man with no shadow, standing directly behind him in the mirror. Still, smiling. But when he whipped around, there was no one there. And in the reflection, the man had moved an inch closer. The rest of the night passed without incident. But the next morning, a note had been slid under his door. No envelope. Just a scrap of yellowed paper. Every time you sleep, the door opens wider. He didn't sleep that night, or the one after. But by the 5th day, his body betrayed him. He nodded off at a rest stop, fingers curled around a cup of cold coffee, and in the dream, the door was open. Not ajar, not creaked, wide, swinging. The house stood before him, fully formed, not decayed, not shifting, clean, perfect, waiting, and on the porch stood Sam, smiling, waving, but Caleb didn't move toward him, because something was wrong. Sam's shadow moved the wrong direction, opposite the light, and behind him, the door pulsed like it was breathing. He forced himself awake with a scream that startled a nearby trucker into calling the cops. He left before they arrived. The next night, it wasn't just knocking. The man spoke to him through the walls. He rented a tiny cabin from a man who didn't ask questions, paid in cash, and promised no neighbors for miles. Just woods, wind, and silence. It should have been safe. But at 2:22 a.m., a voice came through the vents. Not a whisper, not a scream. Just a calm statement: I can wait longer than you can stay awake. The air froze, and then came the tapping. Not at the door this time, but on every wall, as if fingers were testing for weak spots. Caleb curled up in the center of the room, clutching a flashlight and praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. At dawn, everything stopped. No voice, no tapping, but the door had changed. Where there had been a regular wood panel was now a large, perfect black handprint burned into the surface. And above the doorknob, scratched into the paint, 3 rules. 1. Don't open the door when it knocks. 2. Don't answer when it speaks. 3. Never sleep on the 3rd night. He read those rules over and over. That was the first time Caleb realized the man wasn't trying to kill him. He was trying to wear him down. And the 3rd night, that was the harvest. Sleep became his enemy. It turned on him, luring him in with false dreams, soft voices that sounded like Sam, like his mother, like people long dead. It welcomed him with warm memories, and then dragged him into that house, deeper and deeper each time. Once, he found himself in a room filled with clocks, hundreds of them, all ticking in sync, all pointing to 3:03 a.m. And on the wall, written in red, he comes when time breaks. Then the clocks began to melt. He woke up screaming in a Walmart parking lot, hands bleeding from where he'd dug his nails into his own palms. But that wasn't the worst of it. The worst came when he started finding the doors. They weren't just in dreams anymore. He saw one on the side of a gas station. No frame, no hinges. Just a wooden door bolted onto the brick wall like it belonged there. Another time in a forest, miles from anywhere, he found a lone doorframe standing upright in the middle of a clearing. The door inside it was locked, but it was breathing. And once he passed a roadside billboard, and the face of the man with no shadow was staring back at him through a door painted on the advertisement. They were everywhere now, each one marked with the same black handprint, each one waiting. The rules made sense now. The man couldn't force his way in. Not yet. He had to be let in. He had to be invited. That's why he knocked. That's why he whispered. He was offering the door. And once Caleb opened it, once he gave in, even in a dream, it would all be over. But Caleb wasn't ready to die. Not yet. He started writing the rules everywhere. On motel walls, on napkins, in notebooks, on the back of gas receipts. He carved them into rest stop tables, into bathroom stalls, as if warning others might slow the thing down. But deep inside, he knew it was too late. Because now, even when he was awake, he could hear the ticking. And behind every door, he could feel the weight of the house pressing forward, like a tide waiting to crash. And that night, when he finally gave in to sleep, just for a second, he awoke on the porch. And this time, he was the one knocking. It started with the scent of lavender. Not strong, just a trace, drifting through the dark like the ghost of a childhood he didn't remember. Then came the wind chimes. Soft, delicate, far off but unmistakable. Caleb knew immediately he wasn't in his Jeep. He wasn't on the road. He wasn't anywhere real. He was back. Back in front of that door. The one he had promised never to open. But this time his hand was already reaching for the knob. The wood was warm beneath his fingers. Breathing, beating, almost. Like the door had a pulse. He jerked his hand away, stepped back, and that's when he realized he wasn't alone. The porch creaked behind him. He turned, and there she was. A woman in a white nightgown, hair matted with damp leaves, eyes sunken so deep into her face they looked like holes. She stared through him, not at him. Her mouth hung open like she'd forgotten how to close it, and in her arms, a bundle wrapped in cloth. She spoke without moving her lips. "You left him inside," she said. Then she dropped the bundle. It hit the porch with a thud that echoed too long. Caleb stumbled back, heart hammering, unable to look away. The cloth unraveled on its own, slowly, and what lay inside wasn't a child. It was a mirror. Not a full one, just a broken shard. And in that jagged glass, Caleb saw himself. But not as he was now. As a boy. 6, maybe 7, laughing. Running through the woods.
"Calling a name! Sam!"
Then the image changed. The boy tripped, fell, landed face first into the dirt. And from behind a tree, something stepped out. Not a person. Not quite. It looked like it had been human once. A silhouette made of shadows, eyes like wet glass and teeth, not in its mouth, but lining the inside of its fingers. The boy didn't scream. He turned, smiled, and took the thing's hand. Caleb snapped awake in a scream that tore through his chest like a dull blade. The Jeep windows were fogged again. The engine was dead, and someone had written on the windshield from the inside, "That wasn't his memory. It was yours." He stumbled out, nearly vomiting from the adrenaline. The world felt wrong, tilted, slower than usual, like time itself was holding its breath. He sat on the gravel, clutching his head. The images wouldn't leave. The boy, the creature, the trust in those tiny eyes. He had trusted it. He had taken its hand. But how? He'd never been lost in the woods as a kid. He would have remembered that. He would have known. Unless the house had given him someone else's memory. Or worse, returned one he'd spent a lifetime forgetting. He needed answers. Real ones. So, for the first time in weeks, Caleb turned around, backtracked. He drove to the one place he swore he'd never return, his childhood home. It was still there, slumped and sad, looking the way abandoned houses get when no one's loved them in years. Windows boarded, door chained shut, the front steps overtaken by weeds. But the mailbox still said "Ma RCR." He broke the lock with a tire iron and stepped inside. Dust exploded with every breath. The air was thick with mildew and rotting paper. Memories screamed from every wall. Sam's toy trucks, still lined up along the hallway baseboard. A height chart etched into the kitchen doorway. His mother's perfume bottle still sitting on the windowsill. And in the attic, hidden behind a box labeled Xmas 1997, he found the photo album. He flipped through it with shaking hands. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, muddy soccer games. Then, one photo made him freeze. It was from the camping trip. The last picture taken before Sam vanished. But something was wrong. In the background, behind the trees, a man in black, standing, watching. No one had ever noticed him before. Caleb stared at the photo so long it left an imprint on his vision. He kept flipping. Near the back of the album was a picture he didn't remember taking. It was of him, aged about 5 or 6, standing in front of a door. That door. The same warped wood, the same brass knob, and behind the doorframe, nothing. Just blackness. Written in childlike handwriting on the back of the photo were 3 words, "I knocked first." Caleb dropped the album. The room pulsed. The attic light flickered, though the house hadn't had power in years. Then a sound from below. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. He crept to the attic door and peered down. The hallway was empty, but the air was wrong again. Thick. Watching. He stepped down the stairs, each creak louder than the last. When he reached the bottom, the front door was open. Not wide. Just a crack. Enough to see what waited outside. The man. Still. Smiling. No shadow. And this time in his hand was a piece of Sam's old jacket. The blue one he wore when he vanished. It was blood-stained. Caleb took a step forward, rage blooming in his chest. "What do you want?" he shouted. The man tilted his head. Then, with a voice like wind rustling through bone, he said, "I want what you forgot," and disappeared. Just like that, no sound, no exit. Go. Caleb staggered backward, breathing hard. That night he slept with the photo under his pillow, and dreamed of being 5 again, standing at a door, about to knock, and hearing a voice from the other side say, "You already did." He woke with the taste of dirt in his mouth and pine needles stuck in his hair. He wasn't in the Jeep. He was in the woods. The same woods where Sam had vanished. The photo was gone, but burned into the ground beside him, scorched into the soil, were 3 fresh words, "You're almost home." The air in the woods wasn't right. Caleb knew at the moment he opened his eyes. It wasn't just the silence, though that was bad enough. It was how the trees leaned too close together, how the sky above seemed less like open space and more like a painted ceiling, too still to be real. The forest had weight to it. Heavy. Watching. As if it wasn't surrounding him but closing in. He didn't remember walking here. Didn't remember falling asleep. The last thing he could recall was lying in the back seat of his Jeep, heart racing from the man's final words. "I want what you forgot." That phrase looped in his head like a curse. What had he forgotten? What part of him had been carved out and hidden away? Now he stood in the same woods where Sam had vanished 8 years ago. Except this time, he didn't feel alone. He started walking. Branches reached across his path like fingers. The ground beneath him felt soft, spongy, like walking on something that had once been alive. There were no birds, no rustling, not even the sound of wind, just Caleb's breath, sharp and loud in the quiet, and the faintest impression of being watched. He found the clearing 2 hours later. It was exactly as he remembered. Dead center of the forest, surrounded by trees that arched like cathedral pillars. The grass was a little taller now, the old fire pit buried beneath moss and leaves. But the shape was the same circle. The same scent of old ash and something else, something sweet and sour, like meat gone wrong. He stood at the edge, unsure why he came. Then he saw them. Figures, motionless. Half hidden between trees, just outside the circle. Children, at least a dozen, dirty, silent. Their faces pale and smeared with soil, hair tangled, eyes wide and black, not blinking, just staring. Caleb froze. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. Sam. None of them answered, but one, a boy near the front, tilted his head slowly, almost curiously, and Caleb's stomach sank. He recognized the shirt. It was his. A Superman logo, faded and torn but unmistakable. The same shirt he wore the day he first visited this clearing. The same day Sam vanished. The boy took a step forward, and that's when the others moved, not toward him, but backward, retreating into the trees, into shadow. Except the boy in the shirt. He walked with calm steps, like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. His mouth opened slightly as he stopped in front of Caleb, and a whisper spilled out. You left the door open. Caleb took a step back. The boy's eyes glistened with something oily, black and endless. You said you'd watch me. The voice wasn't a child's. It was old. Tired. Full of grief and something else. Betrayal. Then the boy raised his arm and pointed to the center of the clearing. Caleb turned and saw the door. It stood upright in the grass, unsupported, alone, exactly like the ones he'd seen in dreams. Its wood was cracked, the knob tarnished. That familiar black handprint burned into the frame like a warning. But this time, the door was slightly open. From inside came the sound of breathing, not mechanical, not monstrous, human, familiar, like someone was just on the other side waiting. He didn't want to go near it, but he couldn't stop his feet. Step by step, he crossed the clearing. The boy watched, silent now. When Caleb reached the door, he saw something he hadn't expected. Scratches. Dozens of them. Tiny fingernail marks on the inside edge of the wood, like someone had tried to claw their way out. And beside them, burned into the surface, were words written in a desperate, looping hand, Hazanansanam. Then, from behind the door, came a sound that shattered him. A sob, a child's sob, choking, muffled. Caleb, Sam's voice, clear, present, alive. It wasn't a memory, it wasn't a trick. He reached for the knob, but something held him back, a hand on his shoulder. Small, weak, he turned. The boy in the Superman shirt shook his head slowly, and then he changed. His skin cracked, hair thin. Eyes sank deeper, and the illusion fell away. It wasn't a boy at all, it was something using him, borrowing his image. And when it opened its mouth, Caleb saw nothing but teeth, rows of them, stretching down its throat like a tunnel. You don't belong here, it hissed, and shoved him backward. He hit the ground hard. Grass became concrete, trees vanished, and the air turned cold. When he opened his eyes, he was somewhere new. A hallway, long, narrow, lined with doors, all closed, all breathing. He was back in the house, not the dream, the real one. This time, there was no escape. The door behind him had vanished. In its place, black walls that pulsed like veins. He stood slowly, heart thudding. Then, down the hall, a door creaked open. From the darkness beyond, Sam's voice. Caleb, it was close now. Too close. He took a step forward, and the lights above flickered. A shadow moved across the wall. Not his. The man was here, watching, waiting. And Caleb finally understood. This wasn't about escape anymore. It never was. The house wasn't hunting him. It was remembering him. And it wanted to finish what it started. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Each step Caleb took echoed, like it was being swallowed into some impossible distance. The walls were closer now, warped inward, pulsing subtly like they were made of muscle instead of wood. The wallpaper peeled in strips, curling like skin under heat. The lights overhead flickered in a rhythmic pattern, 3 pulses, then darkness, 3 pulses, then darkness. And in the brief moments of light, he caught glimpses of what hung on the walls. Not portraits, not paintings, mirrors. Dozens of them, Tall, cracked, fogged at the corners. But none reflected him. They reflected someone else. Each mirror showed a version of Caleb that wasn't real, or hadn't been real until now. One showed him as a child, eyes sewn shut. Another, older, blood running from his ears, hands missing. Another version sat still in a chair, smiling with teeth too sharp and too many. But all of them had one thing in common: they were trapped behind the glass, watching, mouthing words he couldn't hear. Begging, or maybe warning. The hallway ended in a T-junction. Left or right, he hesitated. Then the left hallway lit up with soft, golden light, warm, inviting. Music drifted through the air, gentle piano chords, the same melody Sam used to hum when he couldn't sleep. Caleb's knees buckled. His hands trembled. It was impossible. Sam was 8 when he disappeared. He didn't compose anything, but the tune was his. Caleb knew it like a heartbeat. He turned left. The corridor grew colder as he walked, the light dimming with every step. The floorboards groaned under his weight as if resisting him. And then a door appeared at the end. Carved oak, ornate, with a tarnished doorknob shaped like a serpent biting its tail. The sound of breathing was louder now. Right behind the door, he reached for the knob, every instinct in his body screaming to run. But then he heard it, Sam's voice. "Caleb, please," not a whisper this time. A cry, pained, fragile, real. He turned the knob. The door opened into a room that should not have fit in this house. It was massive, too massive. An endless stretch of wooden floor, lit by hanging bulbs swaying without breeze. Along the walls, thousands of clocks ticked in disjointed rhythms. None of them matched. None showed the correct time. And in the center of the room stood a bed. Small, child-sized. A figure lay beneath the blanket. Caleb approached, each step a battle between terror and hope. He didn't dare breathe too loud. The air felt sacred here, like it belonged to someone else. When he reached the bedside, he pulled back the blanket. Sam, eyes closed, face unchanged by time, as if the years hadn't touched him, as if he had been waiting, alive, still. Caleb reached out. His fingers hovered above Sam's shoulder. And then the boy's eyes opened. Black. Bottomless. The mouth opened next. But it didn't speak. It screamed. The room shattered. The sound was not human. It was thunder and metal in agony, all at once, tearing the air apart. Caleb flew backward, hit the floor, skidded hard, and when he looked up, the boy was standing, smiling. But it wasn't Sam anymore. It was wearing his face, yes, but behind the eyes was something ancient. Something starving. "You left me," it said. "You brought me here, remember?" "No," Caleb whispered, shaking his head. "I never." "You did," the thing snarled. "The woods, the game, the dare. You told me to knock." The memory crashed into him like a tidal wave. They had played in the woods that day. It wasn't supposed to be real. They found the door standing alone between trees. He dared Sam to knock. 3 times Caleb had said, "And say your name," and Sam had done it, laughing, not knowing, not understanding. The door had creaked open, and something had pulled him in. Caleb had run. He had left him. He staggered back to his feet, breath ragged, heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of guilt. "I was just a kid," he whispered. "And so was I," the thing answered. Then, behind Caleb, footsteps, measured, slow. The man. He stepped into view from the shadows at the far end of the room. Same black coat. Same pale skin. No shadow, no eyes, just presence. His voice was wind against a closed window. "You opened the door once," he said. "You will again." "I won't," Caleb snapped. The man took a step forward. "You already are." And Caleb felt it. Beneath his feet, a low, humming throb, rising through the floorboards, like the house was awakening. Then, from the walls, the clocks began to melt. Their faces warped, hands spinning backward, time unwinding. "Stop," Caleb begged. But the man only smiled, and the house responded. Doors began to appear along the walls, hundreds of them, each creaking open, each revealing a corridor, a room, a memory, a version of reality that never should have existed. One showed his mother, sobbing into a phone, screaming Sam's name. Another showed his father sitting in a chair, shotgun in hand, staring at nothing. Another showed Caleb himself, older, alone, repeating the same line in a mirror, "It wasn't my fault." The house was showing him everything. Every path, every failure, every truth. The man gestured to the door nearest Caleb. "This is the one where you die, fast, painless." Another door creaked open. "This one you die slow." Caleb stared, heart thundering. Or, "The man said you can go back to the beginning. Try again." Caleb blinked. "What?" The man smiled. "The house is merciful," he said. "You can fix it, undo it, choose differently. All it costs is your memory." Caleb's mouth went dry. "That's how you keep people here," he said. "You offer second chances they can't even remember taking." "Wouldn't you rather forget and believe you saved him?" the man asked. Caleb looked down. Sam, no, the thing, was silent again, watching, waiting. Behind those eyes, the boy was still in there, somewhere, maybe. Or maybe that was another lie, another trick. Caleb stepped back, closed his eyes, and listened. The house groaned, the walls breathed, but beneath it all, a whisper, small, real. "Caleb, help me." It was Sam, buried deep, drowning. Caleb opened his eyes and ran, not toward a door, not toward the man, but toward the far wall. He sprinted, heart screaming in his chest, and dove headfirst into one of the mirrors. It shattered around him like glass and water all at once. And then, blackness, cold, and a voice. "You chose wrong." Nothing. Not sleep, not pain, just absence. Until his eyes opened again, and the door was knocking once more. The knock wasn't loud. It never was. That's what made it so unbearable. 3 slow, patient taps. Like someone on the other side knew they had all the time in the world. Caleb woke in a bed he didn't recognize. Clean sheets. A room washed in pale morning light. For a brief second, he thought it was over, that he'd escaped, that maybe, just maybe, he had run far enough, broken enough mirrors, resisted enough doors to outrun whatever hell had taken root in his life. Then the knocking came again. 3 raps. Steady, measured, coming from the front door of the unfamiliar house. Caleb sat up slowly, breath tight in his chest. His clothes were dry, no sweat, no blood, no signs of his escape or his failure. It was as if the last hours, the last weeks, had all been a fever dream. But the dread sitting on his spine, heavy and thick, told him better. This house wasn't a gift. It was the next level. And something wanted in. He stood on legs that felt weaker than they should have, muscles aching from exertions he didn't remember making. The room was too perfect, bland but spotless. No pictures on the walls, no dust, no clutter. It was a place untouched by time, manufactured, like it had been prepared for him. Another knock, then a voice. Caleb, soft, friendly, like an old friend stopping by unannounced. Caleb backed into the corner of the room. It knew his name. Of course it did. It always did. He made his way to the hallway, bare feet brushing against carpet that felt too smooth, like it had never known weight. The walls were pale gray, featureless. Doors lined either side, each closed tight, none with handles. Only the front door, at the far end, stood out, a tall, almost regal slab of black wood. And from the other side, it waited. He moved slowly, careful not to make a sound, as if he could trick the thing into thinking he wasn't home. But the moment he stepped into the hallway, the doorknob began to turn, just slightly, not enough to open, just testing. He froze. The air thickened, like the pressure had dropped 10 degrees in a single breath. Then a whisper through the crack in the door. "You brought me back. Don't you remember?" He didn't respond. Couldn't. His voice had been stolen by fear and shame, because he did remember. Not all of it, but pieces. Shards of a night in the woods, the dare, the laughter. Sam knocking on the freestanding door. Caleb urging him to do it. "It's just a game," he'd said. "Nothing happens unless you knock." But something had happened. And now, the knocking wasn't coming from Sam. It was coming from whatever answered. He turned to run. only to find the hallway stretched longer than before. The end seemed miles away now, the walls bending inward, floor subtly sloping, as if gravity itself had decided to play tricks. Behind him, the doorknob turned again, this time harder. The sound of old metal grinding echoed like a scream swallowed in concrete. Caleb bolted for one of the side doors. No handle, no keyhole, just a smooth, featureless surface. He tried the next, and the next. All locked, all waiting. Each door had something carved faintly into the center, not words, symbols. One had a jagged spiral that made his stomach churn. Another bore an eye, open and watching. One pulsed beneath his palm when he touched it, like a heartbeat. The knocking came again, but this time it was louder, angrier. He turned toward the front door, just in time to see a sliver of black smoke curling through the gap beneath it. Not fog, not steam. Smoke that moved like it had a mind of its own. It slithered across the floor, racing toward him with sudden, violent intent. He leapt back, narrowly avoiding it, and slammed himself against one of the featureless doors. A click. The door creaked open behind him. He didn't wait. He dove inside, and the hallway disappeared behind him. The room he fell into was dark, not pitch black, but gray and heavy, like dusk lived here permanently. The walls were made of mirrors, tall, warped, some cracked at the corners. And every reflection showed something different, not just his face, not just his movements, but possibilities, versions of himself. In one, he wore the black coat, stood tall and smiling with empty eyes. In another, he was curled in a corner, bloodied and mumbling the same word, forgive. But one mirror chilled him the most, because in it he saw Sam, still 8, still wearing the same muddy jacket from that day in the woods. Only now, Sam wasn't scared. He looked angry, and he was pointing directly at Caleb. You left me, the boy mouthed through the glass. Then all the mirrors began to shudder, cracks forming, spider webbing outward, as if the truth was finally too heavy for the reflections to hold. Then they shattered, all at once. The noise was deafening, like reality itself broke apart in that single second. Caleb shielded his face, felt the shards bite into his arms and shoulders, but the pain faded fast, replaced by something far worse. Silence. Complete. Utter silence. He opened his eyes. The mirrors were gone. The room had changed. It wasn't a room anymore. It was a corridor. Stone walls. Cold air. The sound of dripping somewhere in the distance. And in the darkness ahead, a door. Not the front door. Not the trick door in the woods. The door. The original one. The one that started it all. The serpent knob. The scorched frame. The black handprint. And from behind it a voice. Not Sam. Not the man in the coat. But his own. You have to let me out, it said. He stepped forward, unable to stop himself, drawn like gravity. Each step felt heavier, like he was dragging 100 versions of himself behind him. When he reached the door, the knob twisted on its own, and the door creaked open. Just an inch, enough to see what waited. It was him. Another Caleb, eyes hollow, teeth broken, clothes torn, chained to the floor, and behind him, the man with no shadow, watching, whispering into his ear. And the Caleb on the floor nodded, smiled, then turned to this Caleb. Trade places with me, he said. Caleb staggered back. No. The chained version laughed, a cruel, exhausted sound. You already did. And the door slammed shut. From behind it came the sound of nails scratching, desperately. Then, another knock, back to 3. Back to the beginning, steady, patient, inevitable. The door will always knock, and it will always wait for someone to answer. There was a truth Caleb hadn't fully let himself say until now, something deeper than guilt, heavier than fear. It had always been there, quietly rotting behind his grief. He hadn't just lost Sam, he'd offered him. A joke between brothers, a dare said too carelessly. A test of courage with a door that should never have existed. Now, standing alone in a corridor carved from stone and time, with the echo of that knock reverberating in his spine, Caleb finally let himself admit it. Sam was gone because of him. The floor beneath his feet was colder now, wet, and slick with something he chose not to look at too closely. Each wall along the narrow corridor seemed to pulse in slow, sick rhythm, like the house was alive and drawing breath, its lungs stitched behind brick and bone. Somewhere behind him, the Caleb chained to the floor, the one who had traded his voice for silence, kept whispering his name. A chant, a mockery, or maybe a warning. But Caleb didn't turn back, because something was changing. The door, the serpent, handled one with the burned and handprint, was gone now. Not just closed, vanished. In its place was something far worse, a mirror. A tall, full-length slab of glass standing in the corridor like it had grown out of the floor. It was cracked from corner to corner, but somehow still intact, held together by something unseen. The frame was rusted iron, and symbols, those same impossible, swirling shapes, were carved deep into its surface. Symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Symbols that throbbed in his skull like they belonged there. Caleb stepped closer. His reflection moved in sync. At first. Then it didn't. It lingered a little too long after he stopped moving. Its eyes didn't blink when his did. Its mouth twitched in small, strange ways. And then, as he stared, it smiled. He didn't. The reflection reached out, pressed its palm against the glass. Caleb felt it, cold, smooth, real. It was inside the mirror, waiting. Then it mouthed something. 3 words. "You're already in." He stepped back, heart hammering. The mirror began to darken, not from the outside, from within. A black fog rising from the bottom, like ink in water, swirling upward. And within that fog faces, brief, flickering, nightmarish. A woman with her mouth sewn shut. A child laughing with no eyes. A man peeling off his own skin in strips. They passed by like fish under ice, just out of reach, just long enough to know they were real. Then the reflection changed again. It wasn't him anymore. It was Sam, smiling, standing inside the fog, untouched, pristine, and behind him that door, fully open, waiting. "Come back," Sam said. His voice didn't match his face. Too old, too broken. Caleb turned and ran. The corridor didn't end. He ran for what felt like hours, through rooms that bled from the ceiling, past hallways where his own voice echoed from behind every door. Once, he passed a staircase that climbed in a full circle and led right back to where he started. Another time, he stepped into a room that was filled, floor to ceiling, with his childhood drawings, all stapled to the walls. Every one of them had a door. Every one of them was open. He found the exit by accident. A narrow crack in a brick wall. He squeezed through, tearing his clothes, cutting his arms on nails that jutted out like fingers, and fell into the next room, a nursery, old, dusty, toys scattered on the floor, a mobile hanging from the ceiling, turning slowly despite the lack of wind, and, in the crib, a bundle. Breathing, he approached it with slow steps. His heart told him to turn away, but his hands moved forward. He reached the crib, pulled back the blanket, and saw himself, not older, not broken, an infant, eyes wide, silent. Watching then, from behind him, the soft creak of a door opening. The man in black entered the room. No shadow, no sound, just presence. He walked past Caleb without looking at him, stood over the crib, and whispered, "It starts here." Caleb moved to stop him, but his arms wouldn't obey. His legs locked in place, his throat seized up. The man reached into the crib, lifted the infant Caleb with impossible gentleness, and turned to him. "Do you want to stop it?" he asked. Caleb tried to speak, nodded, then trade. And, without waiting for an answer, the man placed the child into Caleb's arms, and everything went white. He was standing in a hospital hallway. His father was shouting at a nurse. His mother was sobbing into her hands. The world was too bright, too clean. It took him a second to understand what he was seeing. His own birth, his arrival. But something was wrong. Everyone was speaking the same sentence, over and over. "He's already been here. He's already been here. He's already been here." The lights exploded. The hallway melted, and he fell, hard, into darkness again. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the house, the hallway. The mirrors gone, the walls blank. But now, there was only one door ahead. Old wood, rust-stained knob, and carved into it, not a handprint, but a sentence burned deep into the surface. Wow you lie I-M-I-N, and beneath it a new knock. But this one was different, slower, softer, from the inside. The knock from within the door wasn't just a sound. It was a violation. A soft tap, as if from fingertips hesitant to disturb, but the impact was immediate. Caleb felt it in his bones, in the throb behind his eyes, in the tremble that began at the base of his spine and spread like a sickness. He stared at the old door for a long time, unable to move, heart refusing to decide between retreat and confrontation. The words carved into the wood, Yo you laiti, I'm ein, burned as if fresh, as if the door had only just been branded. The message wasn't meant to accuse, it was there to remind. Another knock. Then silence. Caleb stepped forward, not because he wanted to, because the house no longer cared what he wanted. His fingers hovered just inches from the doorknob. It was slick, coated in something dark that shimmered when the light caught it, but cast no reflection. The knob pulsed once, just once, like a heartbeat, and then the door whispered. Yes, whispered, not through it, from it. A breath dragged through the cracks in the wood, forming words in a voice that sounded too much like his own. I've been here all along. He turned, instinct screaming. The hallway behind him was gone. In its place, a wall of flesh, breathing, alive, trembling slightly, like it was holding something back just beneath the surface. The house had changed again. It had sealed him in. The door behind him was now the only path forward. He touched the knob. Cold seeped into his palm. A shiver bolted up his spine and forced tears from his eyes without him realizing it. He turned the knob. The door opened slowly. And the world inside was not a room. It was a memory. It unfolded like smoke and film, drawing him into a place that should not exist anymore, his old bedroom. Not the one he'd just broken into weeks ago. No, this was his childhood bedroom, as it had looked on a very specific day, years ago. The day after Sam disappeared. The sunlight filtered through blue curtains, the ones with stars on them. His shelves were lined with action figures and dusty picture books. On the desk by the window was the drawing he'd made the night before. Two stick figures standing in front of a door, drawn in thick, angry black crayon, and on the bed him, a younger Caleb, 10 years old, eye face pale, hands gripping his knees, staring blankly ahead, unmoving. Caleb stepped into the room, and the air changed. He couldn't hear his own footsteps, couldn't feel them either. He reached out to touch the younger version of himself. His hand passed right through, but the boy flinched, like a shiver ran through his bones. Then, slowly, the boy turned his head and looked right at him. I told you not to come back, the child said. Caleb's knees buckled. He stumbled backward, hitting the door frame hard. You didn't listen, the boy continued. Now it's awake. What is? Caleb gasped. What is it? The boy shook his head. It doesn't have a name. That's what gives it power. No one names it. It becomes what we give it. Caleb swallowed the taste of iron in his mouth. I just wanted to find Sam. I wanted to fix it. You fed it. The boy snapped, voice suddenly distorted. You showed it the door. You told him to knock. It was you. No, Caleb whispered. I was a kid. I didn't know. You didn't care, the boy said, voice now layered with something deeper, something far older. You were scared. So you ran. The walls of the room began to melt. Books dripped like wax. The curtains turned to ash. And the floor cracked beneath his feet, revealing black water beneath. The younger Caleb smiled, but it wasn't a child's smile. It was the same smile the man in black wore. And then he split, like a reflection breaking under pressure. From inside his body stepped a figure cloaked in shadow, tall and thin and humming with static. The man, but not a man. A shape, a silhouette of grief and memory and fear. You opened the door once, it said. Now you will hold it open for the others. Caleb tried to run. The floor gave way. He fell. Through memory, through sound, through himself. And then, stillness. He awoke on the floor of the hallway. The real one. The old walls. The flickering lights. The door behind him now sealed shut. Carved into it, new words Wiolambike. He stood, trembled, turned, and the house began to breathe, walls flexing in and out, like lungs inhaling him. The hallway was shorter now. One door at the end, open. Inside, firelight and laughter. A child's laughter, Sam. He walked, because there was no other choice. And as he entered the room, something brushed past him. Cold fingers against his wrist. A whisper in his ear. You're home now. The room was simple. A fire burned in the hearth. A small table sat in the center, 2 chairs, and on one of them Sam, still 8, still wearing the jacket, eyes wide, smiling. But this time when Caleb stepped closer, the boy frowned. Too late, Sam said, and his smile cracked, revealing black teeth beneath. He opened his mouth wide, too wide, and the laughter changed. It wasn't a child's anymore. It was the house's, and it was starving. The laughter didn't fade. It grew, coiling around Caleb like smoke that seeped into his ears, his eyes, his very skin. Sam sat still in the chair, unmoving, mouth stretched too wide, as if his jaw had detached. But the sound wasn't coming from him. Not exactly. It came from the walls, the fire, the floor, from everywhere at once. It vibrated through the bones of the house, a chorus of mockery and hunger. And underneath it all, something that sounded like chewing. Caleb backed away from the hearth, trembling. The flames didn't flicker like normal fire. They wreathed. They moved with awareness, bending toward him every time he took a step. And within them, he saw faces, not of strangers, but people he knew. His mother, his father, Sam, himself, all screaming, but only in the fire. The real Sam, or the thing wearing his face, still sat silently in the chair, eyes vacant, grin locked in place like rigor mortis. The skin beneath his eyes had begun to sag, slowly melting, as though the form couldn't quite hold anymore. Then his voice came again, low this time, cracking through the laughter. You brought it with you. All those years. You carried it inside. Caleb shook his head. No, it found me. No, Sam replied, or the thing that had become him. It was you. That broke something in Caleb. A thin string of denial that had held this all at bay, however fragile, snapped with an audible hiss in his mind. He didn't know what he was anymore. He didn't know what this was. This house. This realm. This nightmare that had long stopped behaving like dreams. He only knew that every step forward made it worse. That the more he remembered, the more real this place became. And the more real it became, the harder it was to leave. He turned and fled the room. The hallway that greeted him was different. It wasn't the same narrow corridor from before. It had widened, stretched. The lights overhead buzzed and bled, flickering in arrhythmic spasms. The walls were covered in doors now. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. No symmetry. Some were upside down, others sideways. Some were little more than holes torn into the wall and framed by wood warped into violent angles. Every door whispered his name, over and over, like a lullaby sung by dying things. Caleb's mind spiraled as he walked. He passed a door carved entirely out of bone, the handle a human jawbone. Another door was made of paper. Thousands of old letters sewn together with sinew, each one marked in his own handwriting. Each one addressed to Sam. There was a glass door where, if you stared long enough, you could see a hospital room. Inside it, his mother sat on the floor beside a bed, her body unmoving, her hand clutching a piece of fabric. The walls around her were covered in red. He didn't stop at any of them. He couldn't, because one door, near the end of the corridor, was glowing, not with light, with darkness, a pulsing, ink-black shadow that throbbed from the cracks in the wood like it was alive. The knob on that door wasn't metal. It was breathing, in, out, and when Caleb reached for it, he heard something he hadn't expected. A knock. From behind him. He spun around. The hallway was empty. The doors were still, silent, until the knock came again, closer now. And a voice followed. "I found you. The man in black." Caleb's legs moved on instinct. He yanked the breathing door open and hurled himself through. The world on the other side was wrong. Gravity tilted sideways. He landed on a wall. Floors were ceilings, stairs twisted in loops. And through it all, the sound of dripping, like blood from a wound that never healed. He stood slowly, vision adjusting. He was in a house again, but not the house. This was a different version, older, dustier. The furniture was warped. Couches with too many cushions, chairs with legs that bent the wrong way, lamps that bled light like water. In the center of the room was a mirror, not cracked, not warped, perfectly clean. And inside it, Sam, not the grinning monster from before, a real boy, crying, banging on the glass, mouthing the word help. Caleb stepped closer, reached out, and the mirror shattered from the inside. Sam vanished. In his place, the man in black. Caleb stumbled back, but this wasn't just a reflection anymore. The man stepped out of the glass, no longer confined, no longer distant, now fully here. He towered over Caleb. No eyes, just smooth skin where his face should be, a mouth that didn't move when he spoke. "You let me in." Caleb screamed and ran. This time the house shifted instantly. Walls spun, doors folded, gravity reversed. He dropped through the floor, fell for what felt like miles, and landed in a room with no doors, no windows, just a chair, and in the chair, himself. Caleb, older, dead, eyes open, smile carved across his face. In his lap, a note. "I tried to close the door." He staggered back. The walls began to whisper again. His name. But this time, there was another name mixed in. Sam, then a third. One he didn't recognize. One he didn't want to recognize. His own son's name. A name he hadn't spoken aloud in years. A name he hadn't even thought since the day he promised never to have children, never to let this thing continue. But the house knew. The house remembered. Because the house didn't forget. It only waited. And it wanted someone new. The name echoed through the room like a confession spoken over a grave. His son's name. A name he had never said out loud. Not since the day the possibility had terrified him enough to flee every relationship, every life he could have built. It wasn't that he didn't want children. He had. He still did, in some buried, aching way. But he'd known, somehow, deep in the haunted corners of himself, that if he had a child, this thing, this curse, this house, this living, whispering nightmare, would find them too. And now it had. The house knew. The walls repeated the name over and over in a hush too soft to block out. His son's name passed between the warped floorboards and curling wallpaper like a secret prayer. It wasn't just whispering it. The house was practicing it, rolling it across its many tongues like it had found a flavor it liked. Caleb pressed his hands to his ears and screamed. Not out of fear, but rage. Rage at the thing that had stolen his brother. Rage at the guilt that had swallowed his life whole. Rage at himself for thinking, even for a second, that it was over. "You can have me," he growled into the silence. "Take me. Just leave him alone." No response. The body in the chair, the future version of himself, or a twisted lie of what could be, smiled wider, the carved mouth stretching with fresh blood as the flesh split further. Its eyes were dry and open. But they moved, they watched Caleb, and they judged. A slow creaking began behind him, wood twisting, nails pulling free. He turned and saw a new door forming, growing out of the wall like cancer. It wasn't like the others. This one was alive. Wet, covered in a pulsing membrane that flexed as it thickened. A mouth-shaped handle yawned open in the center, and from its depths, black smoke poured in gentle exhales. The door was breathing, and Caleb understood. This door led to the next choice, the next punishment, or maybe, if he was lucky, the next chance to stop this. He approached slowly, body screaming from exhaustion, heart pounding like it was counting down. As he reached for the handle, Something cold slid around his wrist. He jerked back, only to find nothing there. But the skin where he had felt the touch was marked. 3 small crescents, the same ones that had appeared after his first escape from the house. They were fresh again. Bleeding, the house was resetting him. Preparing. "Don't," a voice whispered from behind him. He turned. The chair was empty. His dead self was gone, but on the floor lay a trail of wet footprints leading toward the door. Tiny ones, child-sized. "Don't let it wear you," the voice said again, his voice. It came from inside his own head now, but it wasn't just him. It was versions of him. Echoes. Fractured pieces of his memory clawing for control. He placed a hand on the door's slick surface. The membrane peeled back like eyelids opening, and beyond it, light, not warm, not inviting, but blinding, artificial, cold. It poured into the room like a tidal wave of sterilization. He stepped through, and the house changed again. He was in a hospital corridor. Empty, sterile, the kind of place that never really sleeps. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The floors gleamed with that uncanny cleanliness that always felt like it had something to hide. At the end of the hallway, a single door stood open. Room 313. Something deep inside him knew what was behind it. His son. Or at least, what the house wanted him to believe was his son. He walked. With each step, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder, flickered, dimmed. The hallway stretched and twisted. The signs on the walls began to change, first in font, then in language, then in symbols that pulsed like living veins. By the time he reached the door, it wasn't a hospital room anymore. It was a nursery, the same one from before, same crib, same mobile, same soft sobbing from within. Caleb stepped into the room, breath held tight, and inside the crib, not a child, not even Sam, but a doll, an old, rotted thing stitched together from fabric that looked like skin and buttons that blinked instead of shining. The doll sat up, its mouth open. "You left all of us." Then it screamed. High, piercing. A shriek that made blood pour from Caleb's nose and ears. The walls peeled back like paper, revealing more rooms, more younger versions of himself, trapped behind glass, screaming silently. One tried to claw free. Another simply sobbed, curled in a corner, and behind them all the man in black, no longer still. He walked now, slow, deliberate. And in his hand, something Caleb couldn't quite comprehend. A bundle of memory and shape, light and dark, screaming and silence all at once. "You created me," the man said. "I was born when you said knock. I became real the moment you ran." Caleb collapsed to his knees. The truth had always been with him. The house wasn't just following him. It was made of him. Of guilt. Of choices. Of every version of himself that had failed and buried the failure. And now it was time to pay. The man stepped closer, holding the bundle out. "Take it." Caleb looked up. The bundle was a child. Not just any child, his child. Or what the house had built from his memory of what his son might have looked like. Perfect. Innocent. Eyes wide. Waiting. "If you take him," the man said, "you go free. Walk out. Forget it all. No more doors. No more house." "What happens to him?" Caleb asked, voice dry and cracked. The man smiled. "He stays." Caleb looked at the child. Then at the man. Then at the doors beginning to form again, hundreds of them. Each whispering a version of the same lie: "You can leave." He stood, his legs barely held him, but he stood. "No." The man blinked. "No," he repeated, as if confused. "You're not mine," Caleb said. "You were never real. None of this was. Not like that." The man tilted his head. "But it's enough, isn't it? Enough to feel like it was." Caleb turned away, walked toward the nearest door, and opened it. A black corridor greeted him. Cold, empty. And from its center, Sam's voice. Real, weak. "Please, Caleb, no trick this time." He knew it, and he stepped in. Because the house could wear him all it wanted, but it would not wear his name. Not again. Not ever. And deep inside that black corridor, something began to change. The corridor swallowed him whole, not with sudden violence, but with the quiet finality of a place that had been waiting too long. It closed around Caleb like a throat, tight and suffocating. And the moment the door shut behind him, the light vanished. All sound went with it. Even the whispering, which had haunted him for what felt like eternity, ceased. There was no echo, no wind, no steps beneath his feet, only blackness so thick it pressed against his skin like wet cloth. He walked anyway, because the only thing more terrifying than going forward was the thought of going back. The air was colder here. Not in temperature, but in presence. It felt like walking through grief itself. Time didn't move normally. His thoughts lagged behind his breath, and for a few horrifying minutes, he forgot what he was doing, where he was going, even who he was. He reached out and touched the wall to remind himself he was still real. But there were no walls, just void, and the sensation that something massive and ancient waited just ahead. Then came the whisper. Not from around him, but inside him. "You're getting close." The voice was Sam's. No distortion, no echo. Pure. Caleb blinked, tears springing to his eyes. He followed it. The darkness thickened, resisting each step, but he pushed through it like a man wading through molasses. After what felt like hours, a light appeared ahead, faint, flickering, like a candle on the verge of death. As he approached, the corridor opened into a vast, circular chamber carved from black stone. The ceiling was lost in shadows above, and the floor was polished like a mirror. In the center was a single chair, wooden, child-sized, too small to belong in this endless place. Sam sat in it, not the twisted version, not the smiling imposter. The real Sam. His legs swung just above the floor, shoes scuffed, hands resting in his lap. He looked up as Caleb entered, and for a moment, just a moment, it was like the last 8 years hadn't happened. "Hey," Sam said, voice small. Caleb staggered forward, dropping to his knees. "Sam, is it really you?" Sam nodded. Are you okay?" The boy's lips trembled. "No, but you're here now." Caleb reached for him. Sam didn't flinch. He leaned forward and embraced him, and the cold of the house faded just enough for Caleb to breathe. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered. "I left you. I shouldn't have. I should have." "It wasn't your fault," Sam interrupted, his voice muffled against Caleb's shoulder. "You were scared. I was too. I told you to knock." "I knocked," Sam said, pulling back. "But it answered because it already knew my name. It wasn't about the dare. It wanted one of us. And it picked me." Caleb's mouth opened, but no words came. Then Sam looked past him, it still watching. Caleb turned. On the far side of the chamber, a massive mirror stood, taller than a house, framed in black iron twisted into shapes the mind refused to accept. The surface of the glass was perfect, too perfect, and inside it dozens of reflections, each one a version of Caleb, some crying, some screaming, some silent, empty, broken, and among them, Sam. So many Sams. Some were begging, some were laughing, their mouths stretched too wide, all trapped, all pounding on the inside of the glass. "They're the ones who didn't make it," Sam whispered. "The ones who chose wrong. Who opened the door without knowing what was on the other side?" Caleb stood, shielding Sam behind him. The mirror pulsed once. A soft boom shook the chamber, and from its surface, a crack spread, thin as hair, then widening, splitting down the middle like a grin. The man stepped out, but not the one Caleb had always seen. This one had his face, older, pale, dressed in the same coat, eyes hollowed by time. "You can't fight yourself," it said. "I'm not," Caleb growled. "I'm fighting what I became." The man grinned. "I am what you became." Behind him, the other reflections pressed closer to the glass, hands outstretched. "You chose this the moment you walked away from the clearing. The moment you told yourself it was too late. The house grew from that." Caleb looked down at Sam. The boy gripped his hand. Then Caleb turned back to the reflection and stepped forward. "I can still choose," he said. The reflection sneered. "There is no leaving. There's only joining. I didn't drag you back. You found your way here." "I came for him," Caleb said. "You came to bury the guilt. You just didn't know you were the shovel." The mirror split open fully. The versions stepped out. Dozens of Calebs surrounding him in a slow circle, each one a variation of failure. Some limping, some missing eyes, one coughing blood with every step. And behind them, shadows with no faces, no limbs, just presence. Then Sam let go of Caleb's hand and walked into the center of the room. He stood before the mirror. "You want me?" he said quietly. "You always wanted me." The reflections leaned forward. "But you can't have me," Sam said. Caleb's breath caught. "Sam, no." The boy turned. And for the first time in 8 years, Caleb saw something in him that hadn't been there when he vanished. Understanding. "I'm not afraid anymore," Sam said. "I know what you are." He looked at the mirror. "You're just regret that never learned how to die." The mirror screamed. Not sound, a pull, a vacuum. It began dragging everything toward it. The failed reflections, the man in black, the shadows. Caleb reached for Sam as the wind whipped around them.
Hold on to me!
Sam's hand gripped his again, tight, solid. Together, they stood as the house screamed. The mirror shattered. The light went out. The walls collapsed. The breath of the house exhaled for the last time, and silence fell. When Caleb opened his eyes, he was on the ground. Sunlight broke through tall trees. Leaves rustled overhead, birdsong, the clearing. Empty, the door was gone, and beside him, Sam, awake, breathing, smiling, no longer a prisoner. Caleb cried, and for the first time in 8 years, the tears were not made of fear or guilt, but relief. They walked back toward the road together. But as they stepped onto the trail, Caleb froze, because in the dirt, just barely visible beneath a layer of leaves, was a wooden sign. It read, "Daut no kividu." He looked down at Sam. Sam looked up at him, and then they kept walking. Faster this time, because somewhere far behind them, too far to be real, came a sound that both of them knew deep in their bones. One knock, then another, and the forest held its breath. The sound echoed behind them, low and deliberate. One knock followed seconds later by another. It wasn't just noise, it was a declaration. A promise. Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. Every instinct in his body screamed the same thing: keep walking. Don't stop. Don't turn around. The first knock had changed his life. The second. That was the one that meant it wasn't over. Sam felt it too. Though he said nothing, his hand tightened in Caleb's. His pace quickened, and his eyes stayed glued to the path ahead. They didn't speak until they reached the jeep, parked exactly where Caleb had left it nearly 2 days ago. As if the house had allowed this moment of return, this breath of hope, just to remind him it could take it away again at any time. Caleb checked the windows. All intact, no fog, no messages scrawled across the glass. The keys still hung from the ignition. He turned them, expecting the engine to stall, to cough, to scream. But it roared to life like any other car, almost too easily. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb stared through the windshield, mind reeling from the sudden calm, the impossibility of having Sam back beside him. The boy sat in the passenger seat, staring down at his scraped sneakers, fidgeting. There were still shadows under his eyes, still tremors in his hands. But he was alive, solid, real. Caleb wanted to believe they were safe, but they weren't. They were free, yes, but safe, never. Not while the house existed. Not while the second knock still rang in the soil like an infection waiting to spread. "I heard it too," Sam finally said, his voice small. "The second knock." Caleb nodded slowly. "I know. They said there'd be 3. The temperature in the car dropped like a stone in water. Caleb turned to him. "Who said that?" Sam didn't answer right away. He just stared at the trees lining the road. The ones that had whispered their names, stretched across their path, tried to keep them in. "The ones behind the mirrors," he said. "Not all of them were bad. Some were stuck, like me. They told me there's always 3 knocks. Always. The first is when you let it in. The second, when it finds you again. And the third," Caleb asked. Sam hesitated. "When it wants someone new." Caleb gripped the steering wheel. of course. The house had been satisfied with taking. Now it wanted to trade. Not you, he whispered. Never again. But the forest whispered behind them, rustling not with wind, but with purpose. They pulled away from the clearing. The rearview mirror showed nothing unusual, just empty trees. But Caleb didn't trust mirrors anymore. Not since he learned they could lie more convincingly than memories. They drove in silence for hours. Sam slept curled in the seat, fitful, twitching, murmuring now and then, his voice caught between sleep and something deeper. Caleb kept the windows open despite the chill. He needed to feel real air. Needed to hear birds. Cars. Anything that didn't speak with the voice of the house. They crossed into the city just before sunset. Buildings rose like safe towers above them, streets cluttered with life and movement. For a fleeting moment, Caleb believed they were back among the living. But as he pulled into a motel parking lot, cheap, rundown, but safe, his phone buzzed in the glove compartment. He hadn't touched it since the first mirror cracked. He hadn't even remembered it was still there. He pulled it out. 2% battery, no signal, but one notification, new voicemail. He didn't recognize the number. He played it on speaker. First, static, then a faint voice. Distorted, familiar. Caleb, it's me. Don't trust what you see. The boy you brought back isn't alone. The line went dead. The screen blacked out. Caleb stared at it, throat dry. It was his own voice. And it hadn't come from this version of him. Sam stirred beside him. You okay? He asked. Caleb forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. But his heart was already pounding again. They checked into the motel under a fake name. Sam insisted on keeping the bathroom light on. Caleb let him. They both lay awake in their separate beds, saying nothing, listening to the humming of the neon sign outside. At 3:03 a.m., Caleb sat up, breath shallow. Something had changed. The room was colder. The air didn't move. He turned to check on Sam. The bed was empty, blanket untouched, no warmth where a child had been. He jumped up, checked the door, locked. Windows, still closed. No broken glass, no trail, just gone. His phone lit up again. Battery still dead, no sound. Just the screen showing one thing, knock, knock, knock. Then darkness. And behind him, one knock. Then another. And then the third. The third knock wasn't like the others. It wasn't measured or distant, polite or patient. It didn't ask, it declared. It came with weight, with purpose, with a finality that punched the air out of Caleb's lungs before his mind had a chance to register the sound. The noise didn't stop at the door. It reverberated through the floorboards, crawled up the walls, and sank into his bones like cold iron. It rang inside his head, louder than thought, louder than the blood roaring in his ears. He didn't move right away. Couldn't. For a full minute, he sat there, frozen by the door in the empty motel room, staring at the place Sam had been, the blanket still smooth, the pillow untouched, as if the boy had never been there at all, his presence erased with surgical precision, no footprints, no breath, no warmth. Caleb hadn't even heard it happen. One blink, and Sam was gone. But the knock made it clear. This wasn't disappearance. It was invitation. Or worse, acceptance. The third knock had claimed something. Caleb stood slowly. Every part of him resisted. His legs felt submerged in ice. His hands twitching with the urge to grip something, anything. He stumbled to the window and ripped back the curtain. Nothing. Just the empty parking lot glowing under the dead flicker of a neon sign. No movement. No man in black. No Sam. Then he noticed the mirror on the far wall. It was wrong. The reflection it showed was real, except for one detail. The door behind him, in the reflection, was open. Wide open. His own hand reaching for the knob. He spun around in terror. The door was still closed. Still locked. But when he looked again, the mirror now showed two people in the room. Him and a child standing just behind his left shoulder. He turned fast. No one. Back to the mirror. Now there were three. His chest caved in around his heartbeat. He stumbled to the door and flung it open. Not because he was ready, but because waiting felt worse than whatever was about to happen. The hallway was dark, dead quiet, but something was waiting at the far end. Not a shape, not a person, a door. Freestanding, tall and narrow, wooden, identical to the one in the forest clearing. It hadn't been there before. It didn't belong, and it was open. He stepped into the hallway. Light from the motel room spilled behind him, casting a long shadow down the corridor. Except the shadow didn't match his movements. When he stepped forward, it stepped back. He stopped. The shadow kept moving, and then it turned, faced him, and smiled. He backed toward the room, slamming the door behind him. Then he blinked, and he was not in the motel anymore. Gone were the flickering lights, the dusty comforters, the cheap wallpaper. He was back in the house. But not just any part, the heart. The place no one ever reached on their own. The center of the spiral, a massive cathedral, like chamber stretched before him, impossibly tall, impossibly wide, with walls made not of stone or wood, but of doors stacked from floor to ceiling, thousands of them, each slightly open, each with a sliver of darkness leaking from the cracks, and in the center the mirror, the first one, pristine, towering, breathing. Sam stood before it, not chained, not screaming, just watching. Caleb ran to him, grabbed his shoulders. Sam didn't flinch, didn't even blink. "He's not me," Sam whispered. Caleb froze. "What?" "I'm what's left of him," Sam said. "A memory you've kept alive. But the real Sam, he's still in there." Sam pointed at the mirror, at the darkness inside it. "I saw him," the boy said. "He's deep, but he's still alive." Caleb looked into the mirror and saw the swirling dark, then shapes, Sam's face. The real one, eyes red from crying, mouth stitched shut, a version of him so twisted with time that it looked more shadow than skin. Caleb stepped forward. The closer he got, the colder it became. "I have to bring him back," he said. "Sam," the echo Sam, nodded. "You'll only have one chance." Behind them, the chamber shook. All the doors on the walls began to tremble. The knocking started again. All of them, thousands of doors, knocking, in unison. And then came the voice, from the ceiling, from the floor, from inside Caleb's own chest. "You knocked. You let me in. Now knock again, and stay." Caleb reached into the mirror. Pain tore up his arm instantly, like needles dragged through every nerve. He didn't stop. He reached deeper, and his fingers touched something. Warm, familiar, a hand. He pulled. The mirror cracked. The chamber screamed. But Caleb didn't let go. The glass shattered around him, slashing across his face and neck, but he gripped harder. And then, Sam emerged. The real Sam. Eyes wide. Lips trembling, but alive. Whole. He collapsed into Caleb's arms, and the house roared. The doors on the walls blew open, black wind screaming through them. The chamber bent and buckled. The walls collapsed inward like lungs exhaling a final breath, and from every opening came the shadow, the man, the grin, the promise. "You broke the rule," the voice hissed. "You knocked." Caleb held Sam close. "I didn't knock," I answered. The floor gave way, the ceiling caved in, and everything went black. But Caleb never let go. Not this time. Not ever again. The blackness that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, living, aware. It wrapped around Caleb like wet velvet and sank its teeth into him slowly, patiently, like it wanted him to feel every second of the undoing. Yet somehow, through the suffocating dark and the howling wind that had no source, he never let go of Sam. His arms stayed locked around the boy, holding him like an anchor in a sea that was trying to forget they'd ever existed. The house was collapsing, or becoming something else. Caleb didn't know anymore. Time didn't move the same here. Maybe it never had. But Sam was real. He could feel the boy breathing against his chest. He could feel the tremble in his limbs, the heat of his tears. That meant something. In this place, that meant everything. Because the house could lie, it could twist and manipulate and wear 1,000 faces. But it couldn't fake life, not truly, and Sam was alive. The darkness finally gave way to light, not blinding, dim. sickly. It came from torches mounted on stone walls that hadn't been there before. Caleb blinked, his vision swimming. His legs weak as he stumbled forward with Sam in his arms. The room they were in resembled a cathedral, or maybe a crypt. High ceilings, stained glass windows filled with shifting shadows instead of colors, and a massive altar at the far end carved entirely out of bone. He didn't want to approach it, but the room didn't give him a choice. The walls inched forward every time he stepped back, pushing him gently, guiding him, not through brute force, but through inevitability. "Where are we?" Sam asked, his voice cracked and hoarse. Caleb swallowed, trying to keep the fear out of his answer. "I don't know." Sam nodded. He didn't expect comfort. He knew better than anyone now that this place had no such thing. As they moved closer to the altar, the air changed. It became thicker, denser. And then, Caleb heard it, voices, not whispering, chanting, soft, rhythmic. Words that didn't belong to any language he knew, yet somehow carved themselves into his bones. He turned to the walls. The stained glass figures were moving. Their mouths opened and closed in time with the chant. Behind the glass, more faces pressed outward, as if the window panes were just a skin stretched over the eyes of the damned. Some screamed silently. Others begged, and some just watched. They weren't strangers. They were all people he recognized. Old teachers, a neighbor from his childhood, a girl he once loved and left behind. All of them, here. "Those are the ones who answered," Sam whispered. Caleb looked at him, confused. The ones who heard the knock and opened the door. Even in dreams. Even in fear. That's all it takes. He didn't want to believe it. Didn't want to understand what that meant. But the more he looked around, the more the truth took shape. The house didn't just hunt. It waited. For a knock. For an answer. For the tiniest crack in the mind. A single second of fear that opened the door. And when it came in, it never left. They reached the altar, and behind it stood a figure. Not the man in black. Not a mirror. Not a child. This thing was everything. It shifted as he stared at it. Tall, small. Male, female, animal, insect, nothing. Every time his eyes tried to focus, the shape changed. It wore the voice of every version of Sam he'd lost. Every nightmare he'd buried. It didn't need a name. It was the house itself. "You brought him out," it said. "That was not yours to do." Caleb stood his ground. "Then take me instead." It didn't respond immediately. When it spoke again, its voice came from every inch of the room. "You've already been taken. You walk in a body marked by doors. You've left your shadow in every hall we built. What do you think you are now, if not ours?" Sam clung tighter to him. Caleb could feel the boy's pulse quicken. He stepped in front of him. "No," he said firmly. "I walked back in. That means I can walk out, and I'm taking him with me." The creature's form pulsed once. It laughed, not loud, disappointed. "Very well," it said. "You wish to leave. Then choose the door." In a sudden, shuddering shift, the altar split open and revealed 3 doors recessed into the wall behind it. Each one was different. The first door was bright golden, humming with soft light. The second was black, cold, silent. The third, unfinished. Bare wood, the handle still forming, dripping like wax from melting reality. Caleb stepped forward. The chanting stopped. The stained glass windows fell silent. Sam spoke. "One leads home, one leads back here, and one never ends." Caleb looked at him, stunned. "How do you know?" "I don't," Sam said. "But I think I remember." Caleb's heart twisted. It wasn't a riddle. It was a test. The house was watching. Always watching. It wanted him to doubt. It fed on hesitation, on the unbearable weight of choice. He turned to Sam. "If I pick wrong, you'll still protect me," Sam said. "I know." And that's when Caleb realized it. This wasn't a trap. It was a dare. The same one he had given Sam years ago in the woods. 3 knocks, 3 doors. And now, he had to be the one who chose. He closed his eyes, reached out, and opened the unfinished door. Not because he thought it was the safe one, but because it was still becoming, It hadn't been written yet, hadn't been claimed, hadn't been corrupted. A path unwalked. The house roared behind them. The creature screamed. The stained glass shattered. And Caleb pulled Sam through the door. There was no ground, no sound, just falling, through color, through light, through everything the house didn't own. And then, air, sky, sunlight. They landed in grass, dew, covered, cold, real. Caleb sat up. Birdsong filled his ears. Sam coughed once, then laughed, genuine, alive. They were in a field, not far from the clearing, but the door was gone. No ruins, no remnants, just wind, and a silence that, for the first time in years, felt like peace. Caleb stood and helped Sam to his feet. "Is it over?" the boy asked. Caleb looked toward the trees, uncertain. "I think we walked out the only door that didn't belong to it." Sam smiled. And then, from somewhere beyond the trees, hidden in the breeze, just for a moment, a faint echo, a knock, just one, and they kept walking. They didn't speak much as they left the field behind. There were no signs to mark the boundary where the house's influence ended. No black fog lifting, no invisible line they crossed. But they both felt it. The air had weight again, but it was natural. Gravity pulling gently, not a hand pushing down. The silence wasn't menacing, it was restful. Even the forest, which had once twisted in impossible ways, now stood tall and still. And yet, the echo of that final knock, just one, quiet and distant, kept brushing the edges of Caleb's mind like a question he wasn't ready to ask. They walked until the trees opened onto a narrow back road, the kind with cracked pavement and grass pushing up through the middle. An old car rumbled by, the driver barely glancing their way. It was the most ordinary thing Caleb had seen in what felt like years. The surreal gave way to the mundane, and that somehow was more jarring than any mirror or whispered name. For the first time, the world wasn't watching them. The house, whatever it had been, whatever it still was, had lost its hold. They found help at a gas station an hour's walk away. The attendant stared at them like they were ghosts, and for a moment, Caleb wasn't sure they weren't. But they called a tow truck, got the Jeep pulled from the woods, and within a day they were driving again, on real highways, surrounded by real people. The sky never flickered. No strange symbols appeared on signs. The mirrors in rest stops reflected only what they should. It felt almost insulting how quickly the world had gone back to normal, as if the door had closed behind them and forgotten. At first, Caleb didn't trust it. He waited for signs, for things to twist, for the man in black to step out of a crowd or a knock to break the silence at 3:03 a.m. But nothing came. No shadows stretched wrong. No rooms moved when they weren't looking. Even Sam, though quiet, reserved, seemed lighter. He ate, he slept, he smiled. Not often, but enough. Still, Caleb knew better than to relax completely. Some nights he'd wake up with the memory of being watched, not by something outside, but by versions of himself that never made it out. They stood just beyond the edge of dreams, blurred like static, mouthing silent warnings. He'd sit up, heart racing, only to find Sam sleeping peacefully, the hotel lamp humming softly, the door locked and untouched. But the longer they stayed away, the quieter those echoes became. Weeks passed, then months. Caleb found work. Not much, but enough to support them. Sam went to school. He was placed a few grades behind, but the teachers called him bright and incredibly intuitive. He made few friends, spoke little, but he was there, in the world, laughing sometimes, breathing always. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills of their new town, a quiet place where neighbors smiled, and no one asked too many questions, Caleb sat on the porch, watching shadows lengthen across the yard. Sam joined him. They sat in silence for a while, the way people do when too much has already been said. Then Sam asked, "Do you ever think about it?" Caleb didn't need to ask what it meant. He nodded, sometimes. "I still hear it," Sam said, his voice small. "In dreams, not loud. Just like it's waiting." Caleb stared at the fading light. Me too. They didn't speak again for the rest of the night. But something had changed. The fear was no longer raw, no longer immediate. It had cooled into something else, respect, a wariness. The way sailors might speak of the sea, not as something to fight, but as something that would always be bigger, older, and ready to take them back if they ever forgot what lived beneath its surface. Then, one morning, Caleb woke up and realized something strange. He hadn't had a nightmare in weeks. Sam hadn't sleepwalked once. The mirrors remained silent. The world had stopped shifting, and deep down, a thought formed. Maybe the house had truly let go. Maybe whatever ancient thing had built itself from grief and fear had finally moved on. But that was when the mail arrived. An envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just his name written in perfect block letters. Caleb stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a photograph of him, standing in front of a door. The original one. The door in the woods. But the forest behind him was different. Older. Burned. Dead. And in the photo, his eyes were closed. His hand was raised. Knocking. 3 times. He flipped it over. On the back, in the same handwriting you forgot too soon. Caleb felt the bottom fall out of his stomach. He looked up. Sam stood in the doorway watching. His voice was barely a whisper. Did it remember us? Caleb couldn't answer. Because he wasn't sure anymore if the house had ever forgotten, or if it had simply been waiting for them to think it did. That night, he didn't sleep. Neither did Sam. And just past 3 in the morning, when the wind rattled the siding and the trees outside bent in a direction that didn't match the storm, they both heard it. One knock, then silence. Then, slowly, another. And then, after what felt like hours, the third. But this time it didn't come from the door. It came from inside the walls. The third knock landed with the softness of a whisper, but its weight was unbearable. It didn't thud like wood, on wood or fist, against door. It reverberated, low and trembling, like it had always been part of the house's bones. And it hadn't come from the front door. Not from the windows. Not from outside. It had come from inside the walls, behind the plaster and wiring. Behind the studs and beams, in the thin, hollow place where insulation should have been. The knock was inside the house, and already moving. Caleb didn't move right away. He sat in the kitchen chair, the photograph still on the table in front of him. The words "you forgot too soon" etched into his mind like a brand. Sam stood in the hallway, watching his father not with panic, but a stillness that unnerved Caleb more than any scream would have. There was no question in the boy's eyes, just knowing and acceptance. As if he'd been waiting for the knock to come back. As if he had known all along that it would. It was never gone, Sam whispered. I thought it was, Caleb said. You wanted it to be. Another knock. This one higher up, closer to the ceiling, still soft, still patient. But it was listening now, testing. Caleb stood and grabbed Sam's hand. We're not staying. Won't matter, Sam replied. They moved quickly. The car keys were already on the hook. Their bag was still packed. Caleb had never fully unpacked anything, not because he was lazy, but because somewhere inside, he knew. You can't unpack your life when the thing that hunts you doesn't live in time. They bolted out the front door into the cool night air. The world outside was still real. Crickets chirped, street lamps flickered, distant cars passed on the highway. But the house behind them groaned like something turning in its sleep. Caleb shoved Sam into the passenger seat and climbed behind the wheel. The engine started without protest, but the GPS blinked out. The dash lights stuttered, and as he backed out of the driveway, every radio station clicked over to the same sound, a single, slow knock. He shut it off, drove fast, didn't look back. By dawn, they were in another state. A small mountain town where fog clung to the road like wet skin, and the woods were older than memory. They booked a cabin, paid in cash. No names, no history, no trace. But even as the owner handed over the key, she hesitated. You sure you want the one at the edge? She asked. It gets real quiet up there. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. That's what we want. He was wrong. That night, the knock came again. This time, not in the walls, not in the mirrors. It came from beneath the bed. 3 taps, small, like fingers. And when Caleb got on the floor, flashlight in hand, there was nothing, except a sliver of paper pushed out onto the hardwood. He unfolded it slowly. It was a page torn from a book, one he remembered, one the house had once shown him in the library it built from grief. The title at the top read Instructions for Becoming Hollow. The rest of the page was smeared, warped by water damage and something darker. But one line remained intact at the bottom. If it remembers your name, it never lets go. He folded the paper without a word, walked to the back door, and looked out into the woods. There, standing just between 2 trees, was a figure, tall, still, not moving, not approaching, waiting. He didn't wake Sam, didn't need to. The boy stood beside him a moment later, wordless, looking out into the same dark. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. We can't outrun it, Sam said quietly. No, Caleb agreed. But we can stop feeding it. Sam turned to him, confused. It needs fear, Caleb said. It needs guilt, regret. It grows from what we bury. That's why it built the house the way it did. Every room was a wound. Sam was silent a moment. Then so what do we do? Caleb met his eyes. We open our own doors. Before it can. The next morning they left the cabin. They didn't run this time. They returned. Back to the forest. Back to the clearing where it all began. But the door wasn't there. Only scorched grass, charred trees, and in the center, a stone circle, like a well without a bottom, filled not with water but whispers. Caleb stood at the edge, Sam beside him, and from deep below, the voice rose, not shouting, not threatening, just calling, his name, not Caleb. The one he never told anyone. The name his parents gave him at birth before they changed it. Before he buried it. The one the house wasn't supposed to know. And that's when he understood. The house didn't just feed on memory. It mined it. Even the things you thought you'd lost. It found. The final door wasn't built in the forest or inside a house. It was built inside him. And now, it was opening. The name echoed from the well with a softness that belied its power. It didn't scream or threaten. It remembered. That was worse. Caleb hadn't heard that name in nearly 20 years. His birth name. The one he'd shed when his mother left and his father drank, and the world started bleeding around the edges. The name he thought he'd buried under paperwork, behind layers of chosen identity. But the house knew it. Not by accident, not by mistake. It chose it, dug it out like a splinter deep in the skin, painful and personal. And now it was whispering it back to him like a lover calling him home. He flinched. The well didn't echo the way it should. It wasn't a sound traveling through stone or depth. It was a voice inside his head, reverberating from within rather than below. Sam stood beside him, hands clenched into small fists, jaw tight. The boy didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Caleb could feel it in the tension of his frame. Sam heard the voice too. Not the same name, but the same pull. The same unraveling. The house wasn't calling them anymore, it was claiming them. I didn't tell anyone that name, Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Sam nodded. You didn't have to. What does it want? Sam looked at the well. His face was pale. Lips pressed into a tight line. You. Caleb didn't move. The stone circle around the well looked old. Older than the forest, older than the door, older than time. Moss clung to its base. Runes were carved deep into the stones. Languages long forgotten, maybe never even spoken. Some of them seemed to shift when you stared at them too long, as if the marks themselves were breathing. It's always wanted you, Sam said finally. It just needed to take me first, so you'd come back, so you'd open the door. No, Caleb shook his head. No, it took you. I came back to save you. Yes, Sam replied. But it knew you would. It made sure you would. It didn't want me forever. It wanted me long enough to hollow you out. Caleb backed away from the well, his breath shallow, his mind racing. No, this couldn't be right. He had fought. He had endured the mirror. He had brought Sam back. That meant something. That had power. He refused to believe it was all part of the plan. It's not fate, Caleb said. We still have a choice. But Sam didn't answer, because the whispering had returned. Not from the well, from the trees, from the wind, from inside the dirt itself. Dozens of voices now, all whispering the name. His name. But each voice belonged to someone different. His father, his mother, old teachers, friends, lovers, enemies, some dead, some still alive. Every voice from his life was now a vessel. The house had found them, harvested their memories from the folds of his mind, twisted them into something else. Stop, Caleb muttered, hands to his ears. But the voices pushed in harder. You didn't save him. You left him. You knocked first. You opened the door. You are the door. The whispers scraped against his thoughts like nails against glass. He stumbled back, knees buckling. Sam caught him, small hands gripping his arm, grounding him. You're not it, Sam whispered. You're still you. The well pulsed. The stones began to glow, dull red, like coals buried in ash. The runes shifted faster now, rearranging, crawling across the rock in patterns that made Caleb's skin crawl. You don't belong here anymore, Caleb told the well. You don't get to keep feeding. The glow brightened. The voices stopped. And from the depths of the well, something began to rise. Not fast, not dramatic, something patient. First came fingers, long, pale, impossibly thin. Then a hand, veined and twitching. Then a wrist. The arm was covered in carvings. His own handwriting. Notes he'd scribbled in journals, phrases he'd whispered in the dark. Lies he told himself when he couldn't sleep. The arm was built from his guilt, and it kept rising. Sam didn't run. Neither did Caleb. They stood their ground as the thing clawed its way out. It was him. Not a copy. Not a reflection. But the parts he'd thrown away. The shame. The self-loathing. The moments he wished he could erase. It stood before him now, full-sized, full-formed, wearing his old clothes, his old expressions. The ones he'd worked years to forget. You forgot too soon, it said. Caleb stepped forward. No, he said, his voice steady. I remembered just enough. He looked to Sam, and then back to the thing. You only live when I run, when I hide. But I'm done hiding. The creature smirked. Then step into me. Finish what you started. It opened its arms. Caleb hesitated, because this was the final dare. The final knock. Step into yourself, or run forever. But he understood now. The house didn't build itself from fear. It built itself from avoidance, from the pieces we lock in basements and under beds and behind false names. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, into the creature, into himself. Pain flared, brief blinding, and then silence, darkness, weightlessness, and then breath, sunlight, the forest. Sam standing over him. You okay? The boy asked. Caleb sat up slowly. The well was gone. The stones were scattered, no glow, no voice. Just earth, unmoved, unburdened. Caleb stood, feeling lighter. Not free, not untouched, but whole. He had opened the final door, and he had closed it behind him. The ground beneath Caleb's feet was quiet, unnaturally quiet. No hum of insects, no rustle of leaves. Not even the wind dared interrupt the stillness. It wasn't peace, it was pause, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, unsure of what had just happened. The well was gone. In its place was nothing but raw, disturbed soil, no trace of the runes, the stone, or the thing that had crawled out of it. Just Sam, standing close, watching him not with fear, but with a wary sort of awe. Caleb didn't know what the boy saw in him now. He wasn't even sure who had come back out of that thing. Was it all of him, or just the part that survived? For a long moment, Caleb just breathed. He touched his chest, felt his pulse. It was steady. He blinked, and the world stayed real. No flickers in the air. No whispers on the wind. No man in black waiting by the trees. The silence held, and for the first time in a long time, Caleb thought, Maybe, just maybe, the house was done. But then Sam spoke. "There's one more door." Caleb turned, his voice already fraying at the edges. "What?" Sam didn't look at him. He stared past the trees, toward a place Caleb hadn't noticed before. A path, not there a moment ago, carved through the woods. It didn't twist like the house paths. It wasn't slick with fog or echoing with unseen sounds. It was just there, plain and silent, like it had always existed and was simply waiting for someone to remember it. "We never closed the first one," Sam said. Caleb's heart thumped against his ribs. "The original." Sam nodded. "The one you found. The one I knocked on. The one he came through." Caleb's mind raced. That door. The first one. In the forest. So many things had come after it. The mirror, the house, the well. All horrors that spiraled out like rot from a single splinter. But that first door, they had escaped it, ran from it, but buried it beneath memory and time. But they'd never closed it. Not truly. And now it was still open somewhere in the forest, waiting. Or worse, inviting. "We don't go back," Caleb said, almost a plea. "We have to," Sam said softly. "If we don't shut it, someone else will find it." The words twisted in the air, and they both knew. They already had. They followed the path in silence. It didn't feel like they were walking forward. It felt like they were moving backward, into a memory that hadn't finished with them yet. The forest darkened, but not because of the hour. The trees thickened. The light grew sickly thin. The air smelled old, before old, like rot in forgotten corners. Then, through the last veil of trees, they saw it, the door. Exactly where it had been. Exactly how Caleb remembered it. No frame, no wall. Just a single tall, wooden door standing upright in the clearing, surrounded by nothing but dirt and dead leaves. The handle was iron, rusted. The wood was dark, almost black now, and pulsing slightly, like it breathed. "It's still open," Sam whispered. Caleb stepped forward. The air thickened. The ground under his boots felt soft, too soft, as though it wasn't soil but skin. He placed a hand on the door. It felt warm. "I should have burned it," he muttered. "No," Sam said. "You would have just scattered the pieces." Caleb looked back at the boy. "Then how do we shut it?" "You have to mean it," he frowned. "What?" "You opened it without meaning to. You were afraid. Angry. Empty. That's all it needed. But to close it, you have to know what you're closing. You have to accept it. All of it." Caleb stared at the door. All of it. The grief. The mistakes. The things he did to survive. The people he lost because he ran. The house wasn't a place. It had been a consequence. Built one regret at a time. Hammered together with every silent scream he never let out. And this door wasn't just the beginning. It was the hinge on which every nightmare had swung open. He placed both hands on it. And he pushed. At first, it didn't budge. Then it trembled. The breath of the forest hitched, and the wood began to creak. Every inch he pushed, the air screamed. Not in sound, in pressure, in memory, in guilt. Faces flashed through his mind. Sam's bloodied mouth. His father's silence. His mother's suitcase in the rain. Mirrors that cracked before showing the truth. The man in black. The echo of his own voice calling from behind glass. Still, he pushed, and the door began to close. The forest howled. Leaves tore from branches. The dirt trembled. From the other side of the door came a low, guttural sound. Not a growl, a cry. Something ancient and angry and afraid. He didn't stop. With one final shove, the door clicked into place, and everything went still. Not quiet, still. As though the world had exhaled and would never inhale again. Then, slowly, the door began to crumble. It didn't explode or vanish. It aged. In seconds, the wood splintered, rotted, collapsed into dust. The handle dropped to the ground with a soft clang, and that was it. No fanfare. No monsters. No warnings. Just an ending. Sam walked to his side. "Did it work?" he asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared at the dust. The faint imprint in the dirt where the door had stood. He breathed. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel watched. He didn't feel chased. He felt alone, but in the good way, in the way humans are meant to feel, in the way that means the world doesn't have its claws in you anymore. He looked at Sam and finally said, "Yeah, I think it's really over." They walked back through the trees, the path closing behind them, not by magic, not by force, but simply because it was done. Some doors don't slam, they just stop being needed. And when they reached the edge of the forest, with the road stretching ahead of them and the morning sun rising in a sky that didn't flicker or scream or bleed, Caleb knew one final truth. The most dangerous doors are the ones that wait, but the most powerful are the ones we choose never to open again. For weeks after they closed the final door, Caleb and Sam lived in what could only be described as a strange kind of stillness. Not silence, stillness. The kind that creeps under the skin, quiet and unassuming, until you realize you haven't looked over your shoulder in days. Until you notice the world no longer whispers back when you cry, and shadows no longer pause to watch you breathe. There were no more knocks, no strange dreams, no black-suited figures lingering on street corners. But the stillness itself, it began to feel wrong. Not threatening, not haunted, but hollow, as if by closing the door, they had sealed off not just the house, but a part of themselves too. Caleb told himself it was peace, that he should feel grateful, that after everything, the mirrors, the whispers, the hollow thing that wore his face, he'd earned the quiet. But something about the quiet felt unnatural, too absolute, like a song ending mid-note, or a storm that never quite finishes raining. Even Sam, who'd always worn his trauma like armor, began to change. He smiled more, yes, he spoke more. But it was the way he watched the sky for too long, or stood still at doorframes like he was waiting for permission to enter. That made Caleb wonder if the stillness hadn't just settled around them, but inside them. Then came the static. It started small, barely noticeable. A flicker in the car radio when Caleb turned the ignition. A crackle in the television, even when it was unplugged. A hum in the walls of their rental house, not loud but persistent, like an old station trying to tune itself in. He brushed it off at first. Power lines. Weather, bad wiring. The kind of mundane explanations people cling to when they've survived things they don't understand. But the static didn't stay small. It grew. It followed. It began to respond. One night as Caleb lay in bed, he heard it rise again, soft at first, then surging into a loud, electric hiss that filled the room and set his teeth on edge. He sat up, heart hammering. The static didn't fade. It held, like it was waiting. Then, behind the buzz, just barely a voice. Still there, Caleb's blood ran cold. He froze, staring into the darkness, not trusting the walls, the ceiling, the air. He wanted to scream, to turn on every light in the house, to shake Sam awake and ask him if he'd heard it too. But he didn't move. Because deep down, a darker fear had begun to surface. What if this was the price? What if the house, the door, the thing behind the mirror, they weren't meant to be beaten? What if by closing that door, he hadn't ended anything, just trapped it, contained it, left it clawing and screaming inside a dying reality that could no longer sustain it? And now it was leaking back through the cracks. Over the next few days, the static followed him. He heard it in light bulbs, in ceiling fans, in the space between television channels that shouldn't even exist anymore. Sam noticed too. He didn't say it aloud, but Caleb could see it in his posture. The way the boy flinched at white noise, or stared too long at blank screens. Something had changed. And the stillness, it wasn't stillness anymore. It was pressure. Then the lights began to flicker, not just at home, everywhere. Gas stations, grocery stores, schools. Not all the time, just enough to notice. Just enough to feel like something had stepped back into their world. Not fully, not physically, but electrically. Like a signal bleeding into the wrong frequency. And always the same whisper under the hum. Still there. Still where? Still in the house. still in him. Caleb knew he had to find out, not for answers, for control. Because the idea that something might have followed them, that it might be anchored to their presence, made him sick. He'd fought too hard, risked too much. If it was still clinging to the edges of their lives, he needed to cut it loose for good. So he bought an old radio. Not digital. Analog. The kind with dials and antennae and static that you could feel in your teeth. He brought it home, sat at the kitchen table, and tuned it slowly, one frequency at a time. Sam sat across from him, quiet, watching. Nothing. Then static. Then clearer static. Then a voice. Not distorted, not whispering, but clear. "You shut the door," it said. Caleb's hands froze on the dial. The voice wasn't threatening. It was curious, like a child peeking under the bed. Sam leaned closer. "Why did you shut it?" the voice asked again. Caleb didn't speak. He didn't know how. The voice sighed. Disappointed, maybe. Then it said something that shattered the fragile illusion of peace they'd been clinging to. "We didn't come from the door came from us." The radio crackled, then went dead. Caleb sat back, stunned. What did that mean? What did it mean? Was the house never invading? Was it responding? Had the door simply been an outlet, a symptom, not the cause? He looked at Sam. The boy's eyes were wide, but he didn't look surprised. He looked guilty. "What did you do?" Caleb whispered. Sam blinked. "It's not me. Sam." The boy looked down at his hands. "It's you, Dad. It's always been you." Caleb stood. His heart felt like it was ripping in half. No. I saved you. I fought for you. I closed that door." "You did." Sam nodded. "But the door was yours. The house was built from you. All I did was walk inside it." Caleb stepped back, dizzy. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. He wasn't the source. He wasn't. Then the static returned. This time not from the radio, but from the walls again. And in the center of the room, just for a split second, the outline of a door shimmered. Not open, not solid, but forming, flickering in and out like a dying star. Still there. Still coming. And Caleb finally understood some doors don't knock anymore. They remember. And they wait for you to remember them. That night, the house creaked like it had bones again. Real ones. Old and hollow and just barely held together. Caleb lay in bed with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, listening to a building he didn't recognize anymore. It had only been months since they'd left the forest, since he'd watched the final door rot to dust in the earth, but something had changed. The structure they lived in now wasn't ancient or haunted. It was a modest rental, a single-story home in a quiet town with predictable neighbors and beige walls. And yet, every corner now felt too deep, like something had peeled back the drywall and stuffed the space with memories he never gave it permission to keep. The door hadn't appeared again since the flicker. But Caleb couldn't shake the shape it had made in the center of their living room, like a bruise pressed into reality. He knew. Somehow, it was waiting to finish forming, but it needed more than wood and nails. It needed him. It had always needed him. And now that truth had teeth. He rose from bed in the dead of night, unable to ignore the pull, that pressure in the back of his skull, the one that made the silence loud. The living room was dark. Sam slept peacefully, for now, unaware, or pretending to be. Caleb didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to see what he already felt. The shape was still there, right where it had flickered last, like a tumor growing slowly just beneath the skin of their reality. Then the floor changed. Not visually, but beneath his feet. It felt soft at first, like stepping on wet wood or carpet that had soaked up a flood. He froze, moved his foot back. The ground was dry, solid, normal. He stepped forward again. This time it wasn't. There was no sensation, no friction, no contact, just nothing. And when he looked down, his foot was gone. Not invisible, just no longer in this world. He yanked it back with a choked breath, stumbling, heart hammering in his chest. A room without a floor. That's what it was becoming. A place that looked solid, that held shape, but didn't exist. Not fully. Not here. And slowly, silently, it was spreading. From the shape of the door outward, infecting the structure of this world with its own logic. And logic had no place here. Gravity didn't matter. Walls didn't matter. Names, especially names, didn't matter. Because once something was named, it was owned. And Caleb was starting to suspect he had named this thing a long time ago, when he was young and scared, and needed something to blame for what he felt. The static returned, not a hiss, but a hum, low, vibrating, coming from the floor, from below. He dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to the hardwood. It was breathing, slow and steady and deep, the inhale of something ancient and waiting. And then, from underneath, a voice. "What is it you still regret?" He stood so fast he nearly fell backward. The question rang out again, not in words, but in sensation, in thoughts that weren't his own. The house didn't speak like humans. It impressed meaning. It planted questions like seeds. Regret. That was the price. That's what it had come back to finish feeding on. Because even though Caleb had closed the original door, he hadn't closed himself. He still carried it. Still nurtured the weight, the pain, the name he tried to outrun, the guilt over Sam, the people he'd hurt before the house ever came. And now the house wasn't a place anymore. It was a consequence. It didn't need to build itself. It grew inside him. "Stop," Caleb whispered to the dark. "You don't belong here." But it didn't answer. It didn't need to. The temperature dropped. The walls pulsed. And behind him, a small, sharp knock broke the silence. Just one. Not from the door. From Sam's room. Caleb turned slowly, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run, to scream, to pull his son out of that room and drive until the road ran out. But he didn't move. Because deep down, a worse thought had started to take root. What if the door wasn't coming for Sam? What if Sam had already let it in? He walked to the boy's room on shaking legs. The door was cracked open. Soft light spilled out, flickering. Not from a lamp, from a screen. A small, square television Caleb didn't remember buying. Sitting in the corner. Glowing faint blue static. Sam sat cross-legged in front of it, eyes wide. Face blank, breathing slow. "Sam," Caleb's voice cracked. The boy didn't respond, just stared. On the screen, shapes began to form in the static. Not images, not quite rooms, hallways, pieces of memories, walls with bloody writing, a mirror, a forest, a well. All flashing fast enough to blur, but slow enough that Caleb felt every moment hit like a punch to the chest. Sam finally turned. "They're showing me," he whispered. Caleb stepped forward. "Showing you what? What you're still hiding." Then, without warning, the screen went black, and the room fell silent again. Sam blinked. His eyes were clear now, the fog gone. But something else remained, a kind of awareness. He stood and walked to Caleb, held out his hand like he had the day they left the forest. "We can't wait for it to finish," he said. "We have to go back." Caleb looked into his son's eyes. And for the first time, he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. Because something in Sam was watching him now. Not threatening, just measuring, waiting to see if Caleb would open the door, or become it. The road back to the forest didn't exist anymore, at least not in any physical way. The trail they had once followed, the one that wound through dead leaves and hushed trees to that original door, was gone. Paved over, built on, forgotten. But Caleb knew that wasn't the point. This journey wasn't about geography. It never had been. The forest wasn't a place. It was a condition. A shape the mind took when it tried too hard to forget and failed. The house hadn't been destroyed when he closed the door. It had relocated, gone deeper, not into the world, but into him. And now it was moving. Like an infection, it was searching for another host. Sam was changing. Caleb didn't want to admit it, but it had already started. The way his eyes lingered too long on empty space, the strange things he whispered in his sleep, the hum he sometimes mimicked when the static returned. It wasn't possession, not exactly. It was closer to inheritance, like the house was passing itself down. But why? They drove for hours, neither of them speaking. Towns passed by in blinks. Gas stations with flickering lights, diners that closed when they pulled in. It was like the world knew what followed them and wanted no part of it. When they finally stopped, it wasn't because they found the place. It was because the car died. Middle of nowhere. No reception. No lights. Just a single path into a wooded patch off the side of a service road. Caleb knew before Sam said it. This is where it went. The forest was wrong again. Not in the obvious way. Not bending or shrieking or whispering. This was a new kind of wrong. A stillness too intentional. The kind that says we've been waiting. They followed the path. The deeper they went, the more Caleb felt it. The pressure in the chest. The heat behind the eyes. The pull toward places he'd tried to seal away. They weren't in a forest anymore. They were in a reconstruction. The house wasn't rebuilding itself with wood or brick. It was building with memory. They passed the kitchen first. Though it wasn't real. Just a space in the trees shaped like the kitchen used to feel. The scent of burnt toast. The clink of forks. The place where he first told Sam's mother he didn't think he could do this anymore. Next came the hallway. Longer than it had been, stretching into a dark that had no source. A door waited at the end. Not the first. Not the last. But his. The one he'd always avoided. The door to the room he locked inside himself. The one where the house had started even before the forest. "You don't have to open it," Sam said. But Caleb already had his hand on the knob. "I think I always did," he said quietly. He opened it. The room wasn't large. It was a bedroom. One Caleb hadn't seen since he was a boy. His childhood bedroom. Exactly as he remembered it, the blue wallpaper with tiny sailboats peeling in the corner. The twin bed with the frayed Superman sheets. The desk where he used to write stories about monsters so he could feel like he had power over them. And in the center of the room was the man in black, sitting, waiting, not with menace, but with understanding. "You're late," the man said. Caleb didn't flinch. "Not this time. I closed the door." "No," the man said. "You shut it. That's not the same." Caleb stepped into the room. Sam stayed in the doorway. "What do you want?" Caleb asked. The man in black leaned forward. His eyes were mirrors now. Not metaphorically, actual mirrors. And when Caleb looked into them, he didn't see himself. He saw the house. But not how it was, how it wanted to be. Vast, endless, alive. "You named us," the man said. "You fed us. Every time you blamed the world. Every time you said, 'It's not my fault.' That's when the floor started to vanish." Caleb's hands trembled. The house hadn't just lived in his trauma. It had thrived in his denial. "What happens if I take responsibility?" Caleb whispered. The man in black smiled. And then he vanished. The room collapsed. Not physically. Emotionally. It buckled in on itself like a closed wound. Sucked inward until nothing remained but a pressure in the chest and the sound of a slow exhale. Sam stepped forward. "Did you do it?" Caleb nodded. "Barely. I think I started to." The forest was shifting again. Not falling apart, changing back. Returning to real trees. Real soil. The house was leaving. Not because it was defeated, but because its foundation had finally cracked. Regret gave it roots. Denial gave it walls. Now Caleb had neither. And without that, it couldn't stay. As they turned to leave, the air warmed. Birds sang. And for the first time in a very long time, there was no knock. Only silence. Real, earned silence. But as they walked out of the woods, Caleb looked at Sam. "Do you feel it?" he asked. Sam nodded. "It's still watching." Caleb wasn't surprised. Some houses don't fall. They wait. And if you ever forget what you left behind, they start building again. The sun was setting by the time Caleb and Sam reached the edge of the forest. But it wasn't the orange, comforting kind of sunset that paints peace over the sky. It was the dim, coppery kind that looked like the world had bled just a little too much light. The warmth of the real world tried to greet them. cars on the distant highway, the hum of street lamps flickering to life, but it felt like trying to wake up from a dream where something had followed you back. And maybe it had. Because even though the trees no longer whispered and the path behind them had collapsed into silence, there was a heaviness in the air, a weight neither of them could shake. Caleb didn't speak on the drive home. Sam slept most of the way, head resting against the window, but his sleep was shallow, twitchy, like something inside him wasn't ready to rest. Caleb kept glancing at him. Not because he was afraid of the boy, but because he was afraid for him. That night in the false room, the room built from memory, had rattled something loose. The man in black hadn't attacked or threatened. He had simply spoken, and that was somehow worse, more permanent. Words like nails hammered directly into the psyche. You named us. The phrase replayed in Caleb's mind like a warped lullaby. He didn't know if it had been literal or metaphor. He wasn't even sure it mattered anymore. What he did know was that the house wasn't just something that had latched onto his life. It had been summoned in the space left by his silence, his unwillingness to face the wreckage he'd created and the grief he never gave himself permission to mourn. When they got back to the house, the real house, the one with clean carpets and modern locks and no mirrors that moved, Caleb paused before unlocking the door. Something felt off. Not wrong, not haunting, just slightly shifted. As if someone had walked through the space while they were gone and changed nothing but the energy. A slight pull at the base of the spine, a pressure behind the eyes, nothing tangible, nothing provable, just presence. Still, he opened the door. The house greeted them like it always had, with silence, with stillness. But Sam stopped in the doorway. "Dad," he said, "the lights are on." Caleb blinked. They were. Every single light in the house, and they had turned them all off before leaving. All of them. Caleb walked in slowly, checking each room. Nothing was out of place. No drawers pulled, no signs of a break-in, and yet the lights were on. Every bulb humming with a low, mechanical buzz, just enough to set his teeth on edge. He walked into the kitchen. There, sitting on the table, was the old analog radio, the one he had smashed days ago, now perfectly intact, dial glowing, not playing music, not even static, just a low hum, like a throat clearing before it spoke. He didn't touch it. Didn't need to. The message was clear. The house may have left the forest, but it hadn't left him. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the radio, watching Sam through the open doorway to the hallway as the boy lay in bed, unmoving but very much awake. He didn't need to ask. He knew Sam felt it too. That tightness, that watching, that anticipation. Because something had changed when Caleb opened the door inside himself. Something irreversible. And maybe that was the price of healing. Maybe closure wasn't a final act. Maybe it was a door you have to keep closed every single day. Maybe monsters don't die when you defeat them. They just learn to wait more patiently. In the early hours of the morning, the radio clicked, not loudly, just enough to be heard. Then a voice, soft, low, not male or female, just familiar. "You forgot something." Caleb stood, slowly, deliberately. "What?" he asked. The voice paused. Then Caleb didn't move, didn't blink. He walked over to the radio, pulled the cord from the wall, and still, it glowed. Still, it hummed. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just leaned in and said the one thing he hadn't said to the house. Not once. Not even when it screamed through mirrors and walls and his own son's voice. "I'm sorry." The light dimmed. The hum quieted. And for a moment, the silence felt clean. But then came the static again. Soft. Teasing. And the voice whispered, almost lovingly, "You're not forgiven." Caleb stepped back, because now he understood. The house wasn't waiting for revenge. It was waiting for a relapse. A single crack. A single moment of regret. That's all it needed. And it would start building again. Quietly. Invisibly. Room by room. Guilt by guilt. He turned off the lights. one by one, sat beside Sam's bed, watched the boy sleep, and whispered, "We don't answer knocks anymore. Because the things that come back don't always need a door. Sometimes they only need a memory." 3 days passed. The lights stayed off. The radio remained unplugged. And yet, Caleb felt as if the walls were listening harder than ever. It wasn't about noise now. It was about presence. The kind of presence you don't hear or see, but one that presses in around you like, too, tight clothing. Every corner of the house felt a few inches deeper than before. Every hallway had a breath of delay between footfalls. The mirror in the bathroom fogged even when no one showered. Small things, subtle things. But they were wrong, and worse than that, they were familiar. Then, on the third night, Sam disappeared. Not in a flurry of shrieking wind or shattered glass. Not dragged screaming into a wall like last time. No. He simply walked into the hallway and didn't come out the other side. Caleb had been in the kitchen, heard the footsteps, heard the door to Sam's room click shut. But when he went to check an hour later, the door was open, the bed untouched, and the window still locked. Sam was just gone. Panic hit like ice water down the spine. Caleb tore through the house. Closet, attic, crawlspace, every cabinet. Nothing. No signs. No notes. No hint. But deep in his gut, something buzzed. Not the static. This was before the static. A sensation he couldn't name. Like a magnet under the floorboards, pulling at the soles of his feet. Then he noticed something he should have seen hours ago. The hallway was too long. He turned back toward the living room and walked it again, counting steps this time. 22. It had always been 10. He tried again. 30. He turned and walked faster. Walls flickered. The carpet changed underfoot, first cream, colored like the original, then darker, older, stained. Paint bubbled on the baseboards. He started to run. And it was only when the hallway finally ended that he realized he hadn't reached the living room at all. He'd reached a new door. It stood at the far end of the hallway, freestanding, like the first one had in the forest. This one was different, newer, almost freshly painted. But the handle was the same iron, cold, and too heavy for its size. He didn't knock. He didn't have to. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a room that did not belong to the house, to any house. It wasn't a bedroom, or an attic, or a cellar. It was a space with no ceiling, and no floor, and no real shape at all. Just walls suspended in blackness, and floating within that darkness, rooms. Dozens of them, disjointed, cut off, some upside down, some sideways, some cracked open like broken eggshells. And inside one of them, he saw Sam. The boy was standing perfectly still, surrounded by fragments of furniture, pieces of the home Caleb thought they'd left behind. A clock that hadn't worked in years. A rug from his childhood bedroom. A chair from the kitchen table, set they'd abandoned after the fire. The house hadn't rebuilt itself. It had reclaimed its pieces. Sam looked up. His eyes met Caleb's, and he smiled. Not with joy, not with malice. With understanding. "They're not making me stay," Sam said. "I want to be here." Caleb stepped into the void, feet finding invisible ground. "What are you talking about?" "It's quiet here," Sam said. "They don't lie to you here. They show you." Caleb moved closer, but every step made the room shift. The walls rearranged, time bent. He saw flashes. Sam at 5 years old, hiding under a blanket while Caleb screamed into the phone. Sam at 7, holding a crayon drawing that Caleb never looked at. Sam at 10, standing at the edge of the forest, asking, "Can I knock this time?" Caleb shook his head. "This isn't real." Sam tilted his head. "It's the only place that feels real. You only ever saw pieces of me out there. They let me see everything in here." "Sam," Caleb said gently, "this isn't you talking. It's the house." "No," the boy said. "It's what the house learned from you." The floor shifted again, this time violently. Caleb stumbled, and when he looked back at the door, it was gone. In its place, mirrors. Dozens of them. Floating, spinning, distorting. Each one showed a different Caleb. One who had stayed with Sam's mother. One who had run earlier. One who had never opened the forest door. They circled him like vultures. The voice returned. Not from Sam, not from the mirrors, but from somewhere deeper. You didn't lose him. You abandoned him. Caleb closed his eyes. No, the mirrors cracked. You chose to forget. Chose to call it trauma instead of responsibility. No. Chose silence instead of forgiveness. The walls shuddered. The blackness deepened. And Sam's voice cut through it all, soft but firm. If you want me to come back, Dad, you have to remember everything. Caleb fell to his knees. Because he did remember. He remembered the last fight before Sam vanished. How he'd told his son, "You're just like her." How Sam had flinched. How Caleb hadn't said sorry. How he'd closed the door, and how he never opened it again. Until now, tears burned his face. Not from guilt, from truth. "I remember," he whispered. And just like that, the mirrors shattered. The room convulsed. Walls snapped out of existence. And the only thing left was Sam, standing alone in the void. He walked toward Caleb, took his hand, and said, "Let's go home." When Caleb opened his eyes, they were back in the hallway, normal length. No extra doors, just the faint scent of dust and the soft hum of electricity. Sam looked tired, but whole, and Caleb, for the first time in decades, felt human. But as they turned off the lights and lay down for the night, neither of them spoke, because deep beneath the floorboards, too soft for the world to hear, something knocked. Only once, then again, and again. Because some rooms, once remembered, start building themselves. The days that followed were a strange blur of quiet moments, trying to return to normal. Cereal bowls clinking, water running in the sink, Sam watching cartoons without speaking, and Caleb folding laundry, with the kind of focus usually reserved for crisis. They went through the motions, both knowing something had shifted, but neither brave enough to name it. The house had let them go, for now. But letting go isn't the same as leaving. Sometimes it's just repositioning, waiting, recalculating. And this house, this thing made of regrets and memory and shadows shaped like family, it was patient. The first real sign came not in sound or scent, but in something far more mundane, a picture frame. It was a dusty one, hung near the hallway Caleb never liked. The one that always felt a little too cold, a little too stretched, like it wasn't fully attached to the rest of the house. The photo had been there since they moved in, a generic image of Sam and Caleb at the beach, both younger, both smiling too hard, like they were trying to prove something. But this morning, as Caleb passed it, something in the frame caught his eye. He stopped, stared, then stepped back, blinking hard. There was someone else in the photo. Not front and center, not obvious, just barely visible in the far background. A tall, thin figure standing in the shadows of a building far behind them, dressed in black. Head tilted slightly, face blurred in a way that made the skin crawl. It hadn't been there before. Caleb was sure of it. He snatched the frame from the wall, flipped it over. The backing was undisturbed, the glass dusty but untouched. The photo was still sealed inside. No rips, no edits, no new layers added. And yet, the figure was there now. He turned to call Sam, but stopped himself. He didn't want to drag the boy back into it, not if this was some final echo, some last flicker of what remained. He put the frame down, face down, on the counter, but that night it returned. Caleb walked past the hallway again, eyes tired, mind drifting, and froze. The frame was back on the wall, clean, centered, upright. He hadn't rehung it. He knew he hadn't. He looked again at the photo. The figure was closer now, no longer in the far background. Now standing just behind them, blurry hand nearly resting on Sam's shoulder. A wave of cold passed through Caleb's chest. He reached up to take the frame down again, but this time the glass was warm. Not room temperature warm, body warm, like it had been held, or like something inside it had been pressing against the other side. His fingers trembled, and just as he touched the frame again, the image changed, not slowly, Not like a blink, instantly. Now there was no beach, no Sam, no Caleb. Just the man in black sitting in a chair, in an empty room, staring directly into the camera, into him. The lights in the hallway flickered, then buzzed, then cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. Caleb stumbled back, heart hammering, pulse roaring in his ears. He groped for the wall, for the switch, anything to anchor himself. When the light finally returned, it wasn't from the bulb. It was from the frame. It glowed faintly now, pulsing, beating like a heart. He backed away slowly, never turning his back to it, and locked himself in the bathroom. He sat on the cold tile floor and listened. For hours he heard nothing. No creaks, no footsteps, just that quiet pressure of presence. Like the house was leaning in, watching him through the walls. The next morning, the frame was gone. Not broken, not thrown, just missing. He searched the house, top to bottom. Nothing. But when Sam came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes, hair messy from sleep, he said something that froze Caleb to the bone. "I saw Mom last night." Caleb turned slowly. "What? She was in the photo?" Sam said softly, like it was something that made perfect sense. "She looked sad." Caleb swallowed hard. "What photo?" Sam frowned. "The one in the hallway. The one with the beach. She was in it." She said, "Tell him to stop looking for me." Then the man in black pulled her away. Caleb felt his knees weaken. He didn't reply. He couldn't. The next day, another photo changed. This time, the one in his wallet. A picture of him and Sam on Halloween dressed like pirates. The background now showed a door. The door. The first one. Standing just behind them. No longer closed. Slightly ajar. That night, Caleb burned every photograph they owned. Every frame. Every print. Even the digital backups on his old hard drive, wiped. He erased every captured memory. Because the house had found a new way in. Not through mirrors. Not through doors. But through memory itself. Images. Moments. Snapshots. The house didn't need walls anymore. It just needed proof you were once happy. And from there, it would work backward. One pixel at a time. Until it could recreate the entire room again. Until it could bring back everything you ever tried to leave behind. Until it could ask, gently, wouldn't it be easier if you just stayed this time? The house should have felt lighter now. Emptier, stripped of every framed memory, every trace of curated happiness. But it didn't. If anything, the air felt heavier. Like the silence wasn't passive anymore. Like it had started listening back. Caleb paced the living room long after Sam had gone to sleep, feeling the absence of the photographs in every corner. Their blank spaces on the wall looked like missing teeth in a smile that never really meant anything. He'd thought destroying the pictures would stop it, that if the house couldn't see his memories, it couldn't reshape them. But that was naive. Because the house didn't need photos. It had him. It had every moment locked in the softest corners of his mind, every skipped apology, every unfinished goodbye, every time he let the pain speak louder than love. The walls didn't need reminders. They remembered on their own. It began with writing, faint, barely there, on the living room wall where a canvas used to hang. Just 4 words, scrawled in childish handwriting, "Do you remember now?" Caleb blinked, stepped back. He hadn't written it. Neither had Sam. It looked like something from a school notebook. Like a child had stood there with a crayon, pressing letters into paint with quiet fury. He painted over it. The next morning, it was back, darker, thicker. "Do you remember now?" Caleb stared at it for a long time, then answered out loud, to the empty house, "Yes, I do." The words blood. He watched the ink, or paint, or whatever it was, start to leak down the wall like the wall itself was crying. Thin, black tears soaking into the floorboards. He tried to wipe them. The cloth came away dry, but the floor was wet. It was getting worse. Sam started to speak in his sleep again. Only this time it wasn't babbling. It was sentences. The doors inside. They said, "The walls are dreaming. Don't let the floor touch me." Each phrase carved itself deeper into Caleb's mind, until he was afraid to even walk across the room in the dark. Because now, the floor felt different. Sometimes it gave just a little underfoot. Just enough to make you question whether it was still there, like the surface of a pond just before the ice breaks. One night, he woke to Sam standing in the hallway, staring into the kitchen. Silent. Still. Just watching. Sam. The boy didn't move. His eyes were wide open. His hands were by his side. He whispered something Caleb couldn't hear. "What did you say?" Caleb stepped closer. Sam turned slowly, mouth moving again. Caleb leaned in. Sam's voice was quiet, too quiet. "They're building it again." "Who is?" Sam blinked. "The house." And then he fainted. Just collapsed in the hallway like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Caleb caught him. Carried him to bed. Held him until he stirred, dazed and unaware of anything he'd said. But from that moment on, the house stopped pretending. The kitchen was first. He walked in one morning and the layout had changed. The fridge was on the wrong wall. The window was higher. The floor tiles were black now, not white. He backed out. Entered. It changed back. That night, the hallway grew again. Not longer, but deeper, like it had more corners than geometry allowed. Then, the bathroom mirror refused to reflect his face. It showed the sink, the counter, the walls, but not him, just absence. Like something had finally figured out how to edit reality the way it had edited memories. He tried to explain it to Sam, tried to talk about what was happening, but Sam seemed too calm, too accepting, like he wasn't surprised anymore. "Maybe it's always been like this," Sam said over breakfast. "We're just seeing it now." Caleb nearly dropped his coffee. "No," he snapped. "This isn't normal. This isn't us. We made it out. We closed the door." Sam nodded. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe closing it taught it how to grow without needing one. Caleb stood angry, frightened, helpless. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tear down the drywall. But something told him the house wanted that. That if he tried to rip it apart, he'd just be giving it more material, more reason, more emotion to feed on. So instead, he did the unthinkable. He left. Grabbed Sam by the hand, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. They stayed at a hotel that night. No dreams. No flickering lights. No changing rooms. Just sterile air and polyester sheets and a quiet that felt honest. For the first time in weeks, Caleb slept. So did Sam. When they returned home the next afternoon, the house was exactly as they'd left it, every light off, every mirror intact. No scrawled writing, no movement, until Caleb opened the bedroom door and found a new wall, built overnight, perfect drywall, painted the same bland white as the rest of the house, except for the single phrase painted neatly across it in blood. Red letters, "We missed you." Beneath it, nailed into the wall, was a photo, a new one, of Caleb sleeping in the hotel bed, taken just hours before. The walls weren't just remembering, they were watching now. And they weren't waiting for permission. They were starting without him. Caleb didn't scream, didn't tear the picture down. He didn't even touch it. He simply stared, heart thudding, skin cold, mouth dry, as if the act of moving would confirm that the photo was real. That someone, or something, had stood over him in that hotel room. Camera in hand while he slept beside his son. The angle was perfect, too intimate for a guess. Whoever had taken it hadn't just seen him. They'd studied him. The kind of stillness in the image could only come from something that had been in the room a long, long time. He backed out of the bedroom and closed the door slowly, like slamming it would only prove the point. The house wasn't angry. It wasn't vengeful. It was architectural. It was building floor by floor, memory by memory. Not out of rage, but out of blueprints. And those blueprints were Caleb's thoughts, his traumas, his refusals to let go. Every time he swallowed an apology. Every time he told himself it wasn't his fault. Every time he said, "I'm doing my best," instead of "I was wrong." Now, the house wasn't just growing within him. It was using him to map itself out. He called Sam into the living room. Not panicked. Not shaking. Just steady, grim, clear. The way someone looks when they've decided to stop running, even if it kills them. We're being rebuilt, he said. Sam blinked. Like inside? No, not just that. Out here, too. The house is a replica now. A reconstruction of every place we've ever been. It's taking what we forget and making it real again. It's turning memories into rooms. Sam was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's why it didn't need the photo albums." Caleb nodded. It didn't need them because we remembered what they looked like. That night, he tried something different. He sat in the dark alone and started to speak, out loud, to the walls. "I remember the hospital room," he said. "The day Sam was born. I remember the smell of antiseptic and how cold her hand was. I remember how I wanted to cry but didn't. Because men don't cry. That's what I told myself. So I held it in and let it turn into something sour." He waited. No response. So he went on. "I remember the first night she left. Not the one where she took her bags. The one before that. The one where she decided and I knew but didn't ask. I sat in the other room, pretending to fall asleep before she turned the light off. Because if I didn't see her face, I wouldn't have to face what I did." The house creaked. Just once. Low and slow, almost respectful. I remember blaming Sam. Telling myself I couldn't be a father, because I didn't have a father. That it was okay to be distant, to be cold, because it was better than being violent. But I see now that silence is its own kind of harm. The air changed. He felt it. The temperature didn't drop. It lifted. Something in the walls sighed, almost content. And then he heard footsteps. Not his. Not Sam's. Above him. But there was no second floor. He rose. Moved slowly. Sam met him at the hallway wide-eyed. "You heard it too?" Caleb nodded. "There's something up there. But there's no attic," Sam whispered. Caleb didn't reply. Just walked down the hall, past the door with the picture and the blood-red words. Past the bathroom where the mirror had stopped showing him. He stopped where the hallway ended, and where it should have stopped. But now, impossibly, there was a new door above them. In the ceiling, a pull-down hatch, a string dangling gently. He stared, and it stared back. "What do you think is up there?" Sam asked, barely breathing. "Us," Caleb replied. "The us we didn't finish becoming." He pulled the string. The hatch dropped with a low moan, unfolding a rickety staircase. He looked back at Sam. "You don't have to come. I'm not staying alone down here." They climbed, step by step. The stairs creaked, not from age, but from resistance. Like they weren't meant to be walked by anyone who hadn't confessed something. When they reached the top, they found a single room. Unfurnished, unpainted. A single window looking out into nothing but blackness. No stars, no moon, just void. And in the center, a desk. On the desk, blueprints. Caleb stepped closer. His hands trembled. They weren't blueprints of a house. They were layouts of moments. Each room labeled with an event. The night you lied about being okay. The time you let her cry alone. The day you left Sam at school and forgot. Dozens of floor plans, drawn in perfect angles, each representing not walls, but wounds. "This isn't a house," Caleb whispered. "It's a memory palace made of failures." Sam said nothing, but he walked to the desk and picked up a pencil lying beside the blueprints. He started sketching. Not fast, not scared, deliberate, focused. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked. Sam didn't look up. "I'm drawing a new room," he said. "One that wasn't made from pain. One we get to build on purpose." The paper accepted the marks like thirsty ground, and the walls around them groaned, not in anger, but in adjustment. Caleb stepped beside him, picked up a second pencil, and drew a doorway labeled, "The day I told you I was sorry." The void outside the window began to shimmer, ever so slightly, like light trying to break through. Because if the house could build itself from regret, maybe, just maybe, it could be rebuilt with truth, not to erase the damage, but to honor it, to give it shape, to finally finish it. Morning didn't come with sunlight anymore. It came with silence. Not the comforting kind, but the dense, loaded silence of something watching but not yet moving. Like breath held in a lung too long, waiting to exhale chaos. Caleb and Sam had slept in shifts after that night in the attic. The night they discovered the blueprints not of architecture, but of their own emotional floor plan. Since then, the house had stopped playing tricks. No more flickering lights. No more shifting hallways. No more screams hidden in the pipes. That, Caleb realized, was far worse. The house wasn't lashing out because it had moved past anger. It had become intentional. It didn't just want to scare them, it wanted to include them. The attic remained open now. Neither of them dared close it. The desk remained exactly as they'd left it, the drawings still laid out, floor plans written in sins, sketches drawn in redemption. And slowly, impossibly, the house began to adjust itself according to those designs. Doors they never remembered having would appear, leading not into fear, but into memories, controlled ones. Rooms where echoes didn't scream, but whispered fragments. A hallway that led Caleb to the smell of his wife's old perfume. A pantry where the air carried the sound of Sam's laughter as a toddler, muffled and distant, like it had been sealed in the walls and forgotten. But the more they gave, the more the house wanted. Each time they built a memory, each time they sat at the desk and added a new detail, something would vanish elsewhere. A photo, a book, a voicemail, as if the house required an exchange. To remember differently, you had to forget something first. One night, Caleb woke to find Sam standing at the desk again, drawing by candlelight. "You should be asleep," he said. Sam didn't turn. "I can't. It's not done." "What isn't?" Sam drew a long hallway. "The part where you tell me what happened that night. The one you don't talk about. The one with Mom." Caleb felt his breath catch. Not in shame. Not in avoidance, but because he had drawn that room himself. Locked it behind 3 doors in the blueprint. Never labeled it. Never explained it. "How do you know about that?" Sam finally turned. "Because the house showed me. It said if I'm going to keep building, I need to know what not to copy." Caleb sat down. The weight of the moment sat heavier than the air itself. "It was the night she left for good," he said. "Not with luggage. Not with drama. Just a sentence. 'You've stopped being here.'" "Caleb." "That's all she said. I didn't even look up from the TV." Sam stared at him. "And then, she put her hand on your head, kissed your temple, and walked out the front door. I didn't say anything. Not a word. Not 'don't go.' Not 'come back.' I just let her leave." Sam looked down at the paper. "And I think," Caleb said, voice cracking, "somewhere inside me, I believed the house would make her come back. That if I built enough guilt, enough regret, she'd have to reappear. Because ghosts always come back to unfinished business, right?" Sam drew a small box at the end of the hallway. Labeled it, "The room where she didn't say goodbye." Caleb closed his eyes. "This place isn't haunted by her. It's haunted by what I did with her absence." That night the house changed again. This time, it didn't add a room. It added a name, etched into the wall outside the attic, a name neither of them had spoken in years. Mira, Sam's mother, Caleb's shame, and beside the name, a date. One that made Caleb's knees go weak. Tomorrow. The house was preparing something, not to terrorize them, to commemorate. A countdown not to fear, but to confrontation. "What happens tomorrow?" Sam asked, voice barely audible. Caleb didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep in his gut, he already knew. The house had been rebuilt for a reason, and that reason had a name, a voice, and a room that had not yet been opened. The house did not sleep that night. The floors didn't creak, the doors didn't shift, but there was a hum beneath the wood, deep and steady, like something charging. Preparing. Caleb sat on the couch with the lamp off, staring into the dark, not out of fear anymore, but out of readiness. Tomorrow. That's what the house had written. That single word had taken over every wall overnight, appearing in faint chalky strokes, like fingerprints left by 1,000 unseen hands. Tomorrow. It was a promise, not a threat, but it felt heavier than anything the house had ever whispered before. Sam stayed in his room, door slightly cracked, as if he wanted to hear if something came, but not be fully seen by it. He hadn't drawn anything new, hadn't spoken since reading her name carved into the wood like a gravestone you forgot you helped build. Mira. The name hung in the air now, invisible but impossible to ignore. Caleb could feel her presence in the silence, like the house had built enough of her to bring back not her body, but her absence. The shape she left behind, the weight of what she never got to say. When the clock blinked past midnight, the humming stopped. The lights in the house flickered once, and then a new door appeared. No crash, no fanfare. Just suddenly there, at the end of the hallway that had always stopped short. It was a perfect door. Wooden, pale, soft somehow, like it didn't want to be feared. It had her name etched at the center in delicate cursive Mira. Caleb stood, heart hammering. Sam stepped beside him, barefoot, eyes wide. Neither spoke. They just stared at the door like it was a coffin they'd buried wrong, and now it had returned, not angry, but open. "We don't have to go in," Caleb said, barely audible. Sam didn't respond. He reached for the knob. It turned without resistance. The room beyond was not what Caleb expected. It wasn't twisted or impossible. It wasn't built from broken memories or distorted grief. It was her, exactly as she'd left it. A reading chair in the corner, worn from years of sitting cross-legged with books. A blanket draped across the back, her favorite one, the one with the faded autumn leaves stitched into the fabric. The scent of jasmine. Her scent, still clinging to the air as though she'd stepped out only minutes ago. And there she was. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. Just Mira. Standing at the window, back to them, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't turn. Didn't move. But she spoke. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said softly, voice carrying like wind through trees. Caleb's breath hitched. He stepped forward, one slow foot at a time. "Mira," he said. It felt unnatural, foreign in his mouth after so many years of silence. She turned then, not angry, not decayed or distorted, just tired. Worn in a way grief can shape a face even when it doesn't age it. "You built this," she said. "I didn't mean to. I know," she nodded. "But you did anyway. You kept looking for me in the wreckage, and the house, it gave you what you wanted. My echo." Tears burned behind Caleb's eyes. "I thought maybe if I held on to everything long enough, you'd find a way back," she finished for him. "But Caleb, I was never lost. You just never let me go." He stepped closer. "You were gone so fast. I didn't know how to carry all of it." "You didn't have to carry it alone," she said gently. "But you locked everyone out, even Sam." The boy flinched. Mira looked at her son now. Really looked. And her face broke. "I'm sorry, baby," she said. "You were so small. And I left you in a war I started." Sam moved to her without hesitation. Hugged her. Or tried to. Because as his arms wrapped around her, she shimmered. Not like a trick. Like acceptance. Like she had said what she needed to say. And now the house no longer had a reason to keep her here. "I didn't know I remembered you this clearly," Caleb whispered. Mira turned to him. "You remembered the pain. And the house built the rest." She stepped back, fading slowly. "You don't need to keep building around me. You can let the foundation settle." And then she was gone. No scream, no flicker. Just a room with an empty chair, a blanket, and a warmth that hadn't been in the house for years. Caleb stood there, hands still open, like he could hold her presence a second longer. But the house didn't demand it anymore. It had finished its construction. This room, this goodbye, had been the final blueprint. As they stepped out and closed the door, it didn't vanish. It just stayed there, still and sacred, like a finished chapter. And across the walls of the hallway, all the words that once said tomorrow began to fade. Because tomorrow had come. And this time, it had left peace behind. Peace, as it turned out, had a strange texture. Not soft, not warm, just hollow. After Mira's room appeared and her echo finally faded, Caleb expected something dramatic. Collapse, maybe. A violent purging of the house. Lights bursting, walls trembling, a final scream swallowed by the dark. But there was no exorcism, no fanfare. The house simply quieted, as if satisfied. As if, for the first time in a very long time, it was full. Days passed. Nothing changed. No new rooms. No whispers. No footsteps that didn't belong. It was unnerving, like a storm that had passed too cleanly. The house had been so loud for so long that its silence now felt more sinister than comforting. Like it hadn't finished, only paused. Caleb still checked every room each morning, just to be sure. Mira's remained untouched and serene, her chair unmoved, her blanket unwrinkled, the scent of jasmine slowly fading like a memory properly placed on a shelf. Sam, meanwhile, had started to draw less. He didn't speak about the house's changes, didn't ask to explore. He seemed distant, not in a haunted way, but in a finished one, like his part of the story had ended, and now he was waiting for everyone else to catch up. But one morning, Caleb noticed something. A door, not a new one. An old one, the basement door. The one that had always been there and never mattered. It had always stayed locked. Not out of fear, just out of habit. The kind of door you forget because it's never needed. Now it stood wide open. No wind, no forced lock, just open. Inviting. Inside, stairs led down into shadow, but the switch on the wall wouldn't work. No light, no sound. Just a cold draft spiraling up like breath from a mouth that hadn't spoken in years. Caleb called for Sam. Together, they stood at the threshold, both unsure. "I thought this place was finished," Caleb said quietly. Sam shook his head. "You closed her room. That doesn't mean you're done." So they went down, step by step. Each creak underfoot felt like walking on ribs, as though the house had grown a spine down there, and they were walking directly across it. At the bottom, they expected boxes. Old furniture. Maybe the smell of mold. Instead, they found rooms. Again, but not just any rooms. Copies. A replica of Caleb's childhood bedroom. Every toy, every scratch on the wall, the broken window latch. Further in, another room. A perfect recreation of the kitchen where his mother once stood, holding a cigarette with shaking hands, yelling at a man Caleb never dared call father. Sam walked through them, quiet, studying. Then he stopped at a room neither of them recognized. It was small, dark, with nothing inside but a mirror. A simple one, old and tall, the glass warped around the edges. "What is this?" Sam asked. Caleb stepped inside, staring at the reflection. But it didn't show them. It showed a version of them. A twisted mirror, memory. Sam, older, angry, yelling. Caleb, cold, eyes dead, turning away. It wasn't real. But it could have been. "What is this place?" Caleb asked the air, already knowing. The house answered. Not with sound, but with presence. This was where it stored the choices never made. The versions of them born from silence, avoidance, pride. Every time Caleb walked away instead of listening, every time Sam screamed for help in ways his father was too distracted to hear. All of it stored like blueprints that had been rejected, but never discarded. The basement wasn't where the house built itself. It was where the drafts lived, and they weren't dormant anymore. The mirror shimmered. The version of Sam inside moved on its own, smirking. "You'll be back," it said. "You always are." Caleb reached out, hand trembling, and touched the glass. It was ice cold. Then he pulled Sam away. "No," he said. "Not this time." They left the room, climbed the stairs, closed the basement door. But it didn't latch. It hung ajar, just a sliver. And Caleb understood. The house had given him closure, yes. But closure isn't final. It's a door that must be chosen every day. Because pain, regret, anger, they don't vanish. They wait. They watch. They offer drafts of who you could still become if you ever stop paying attention. That night, he nailed the basement door shut. Not because it was haunted, but because it was familiar. And sometimes, the familiar is the most dangerous thing of all. He stood with Sam afterward, hammer still in hand. What if it opens again? Sam asked. Caleb looked down the hallway, then at the boy he was finally learning to know. Then we close it. Together. Every time. And for the first time since the first knock, the house didn't hum. It breathed, quietly, and let them be. The days blurred again, but differently this time. Not in dread, not in madness, but in an uneasy quiet that neither welcomed nor warned. The house, as far as Caleb could tell, had stopped building. Mira's room remained untouched. The attic still held its blueprints like a museum of what had been, and the basement door, sealed with nails and resolve, had stayed shut. Yet the air hadn't softened. It held a weight not of haunting, but of expectation, as if the house was no longer asking questions, but waiting for answers. For what came after closure. And that was the part Caleb hadn't prepared for. Because after all the rooms, all the nightmares, all the unspoken griefs, came something even more terrifying: the future. Sam had started to draw again, but not blueprints. Now it was people, faces. Mostly Caleb's, sometimes Mira's, and once one that made Caleb stop cold when he saw it left on the table. It was Caleb, older, alone. Walls behind him made of static and ash, his own face twisted into the same shape he once feared in the mirror. A mask of control pretending to be calm. "Where did you see this?" he asked Sam. "I didn't," the boy replied. "I heard it." "What do you mean?" Sam looked up, brows drawn. "The walls. They don't just show anymore, they talk. Only sometimes, and not like speech. It's more like when you're dreaming but you know what someone means without them saying it." Caleb sat down, the weight of what Sam said landing harder than expected. What did they say this time? Sam hesitated. Then, that if you don't forgive yourself, you'll build a version of this house that never ends. One no one can leave. That night, Caleb walked every hallway, every room, alone. He stepped into Mira's space, touched the blanket she never used again, stood in the center of the attic and stared at the memory, plans of mistakes already faced. Then, against everything in him, he went to the basement. He pulled the nails free, slowly, one by one. Not because he wanted to open it, but because leaving it sealed forever was just another way of pretending he was finished. The stairs welcomed him like old friends, groaning, familiar, careful. The mirror room was gone. In its place, a long corridor made of echoes, actual ones. Every footstep returned to him not as sound, but voice. His own, spoken from different moments. "Maybe I'm just not built to be a dad. She should have fought harder. I don't know what you want from me. You're just like her." And then, "I'm sorry," softer, honest, real. That one repeated louder than the rest. He kept walking, until he found the room at the end, unmarked, unnamed. Inside, there was a chair, one, facing a blank wall. No windows, no doors behind him. He sat, and the wall came alive, not with images, with possibility. It didn't show memories. It showed what might still come. A kitchen table, years from now, with Sam grown, laughing. A phone call answered instead of ignored. A moment when Caleb wanted to disappear but didn't. And then, in flickers, that same older version Sam had drawn, sitting in silence, walls growing tighter, house folding inward. A man who didn't forget, just never forgave. The wall stilled, and this time it spoke. In a voice that was his own. "You can leave, but not without choosing." Choosing what? To become someone new, or repeat the house forever. Caleb stood, walked back up, closed the basement door again. Didn't nail it shut. Didn't need to. Because this time, it wasn't about locking something away. It was about being willing to return without being swallowed. The next day, he handed Sam a hammer and said, "Help me take the attic apart, not destroy it. Just take it down, piece by piece, together." And as they worked, they found things in the walls. Drawings Sam made as a child. Letters Caleb wrote but never mailed. A lock of Mira's hair saved in a book neither of them remembered owning. The house hadn't just been haunted. It had collected them, saved them, kept every version of who they were in case they ever wanted to look again. And now it was ready to let go. When the attic was bare, Caleb looked at Sam. "We'll build new rooms," he said. Sam smiled, with real windows this time. Outside, the wind passed gently through the trees. No knocks, no whispers, just life moving forward. And for once, the house didn't stop it. The attic was empty now, and for the first time, it stayed that way. No new sketches appeared overnight. No blueprints redrew themselves. The floor no longer groaned like a stomach still hungry. It was just a space now, a space freed. Sam's drawings had stopped showing twisted reflections and instead turned into pages of simple, honest things. Trees, the dog he always said they'd get, sunlight through windows that never closed themselves. Caleb didn't realize until much later that this was the first week the house hadn't tried to speak to him. No whispers in the water pipes. No dreams with locked doors. Just the soft hush of a place that had finally exhaled. But peace doesn't mean perfection. It never does. Caleb still woke up at 3:12 a.m. most nights, not because anything happened, but because it used to. That hour had once belonged to the house, claimed by its shifting walls and breathy secrets. Now, it was empty. A vacuum. But when something leaves, it doesn't always take its shape with it. Sometimes it leaves behind a mold, a silence that remembers. And that's what the house had become, a place that remembered everything. Some days, Caleb would find old notes tucked in the seams of the house, beneath a stair, inside a baseboard, in a crack in the floor that hadn't existed yesterday. They weren't scary, just unfinished thoughts. I should have asked her to stay. He looked just like me when he lied. Love doesn't mean never breaking. He realized then that the house hadn't only been echoing his memories. It had learned to echo its own. The place had developed its own record of pain, love, and confusion. All the lives that had passed through it, ones long before Caleb and Sam, had left fingerprints. And now that it wasn't being fed terror or regret, it was processing, like a creature that had finally eaten enough to dream. One day, Sam approached with a question so calm it made Caleb stop breathing for a moment. "Can we keep living here?" Caleb looked around the living room, the very walls that once shifted into impossible shapes and opened into rooms built from sorrow, and asked the real question in return. "Do you feel safe?" Sam nodded, not like everything's fixed, but like it's listening now, not controlling, just waiting to see who we become next. And Caleb understood. The house wasn't the villain. It had never been. It was a mirror, a listener, a builder, a sponge. They had poured trauma into its beams, and it had given them back nightmares in the shape of rooms. But when they changed, truly changed, it stopped fighting. It became still. Not because it was gone, but because it had learned. Still, the question lingered, what now? You don't just survive a house like this. You don't pack up and leave and pretend it never happened. Because it did happen. Every wall still held the fingerprint of a whisper. Every nail still remembered being driven in with guilt. But that didn't mean it had to remain a house of horror. It could become something else. So Caleb bought paint. Real, bright, ugly paint. Yellows that were too loud. Blues that hurt to look at in the morning sun. Reds that clashed with every piece of furniture they owned. And he let Sam pick the colors. Because they were tired of remembering. It was time to write over. Room by room, they painted the walls, laughing more than they spoke, spilling color in ways they would have hated a year ago. They planted a tree in the front yard. Even though neither of them knew how to take care of it, they adopted a dog, a mutt with too much tongue and a fear of thunder, and named him Echo. The house didn't resist. It creaked sometimes, sure. It shifted slightly, but not in malice, more like adjusting to its new skin. And one evening, after dinner, when the light hit just right, Caleb swore he saw Mira's reflection in the kitchen window. Smiling, content, gone. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The house was quiet that night, not empty, at peace. And that silence, after everything, meant more than any scream ever had. Years passed quietly, like dust settling after a long storm. The house, once a living thing hungry for grief, had finally gone still, but not dead, never dead. Its walls no longer breathed with secrets or reshaped themselves in the dark, but they remembered. Not in the way haunted places remember, with clinging shadows and cold drafts, but like old friends do silently, gently, letting you be who you are without forgetting who you were. Caleb aged in the house that once almost broke him. His steps grew slower, but steadier. His eyes softer, not from surrender, but from clarity. He didn't flinch when a door creaked, or when the pipes moaned at night. He knew now that the house wasn't trying to scare him. It was simply talking in its own language. A language of memory, of held breath, of every version of him that had once walked its halls. Sam grew up fast in that space. Not because he had to, not anymore, but because healing makes you want to become something more. He stopped drawing the house's rooms and started painting things the house couldn't predict. Mountains they'd never seen, cities they hadn't visited, people they hadn't become. He still lived there, even as a man. Not out of fear of leaving, but out of choice. That house had become the one place where nothing had to be buried. Not pain, not truth, not joy. Everything could live side by side. The attic had been turned into a studio. Sunlight flooded through a new skylight they installed themselves. Crooked, imperfect, but honest. The walls were plastered with color, chaotic and mismatched, because there was no blueprint anymore. Just exploration. Sam's laughter filled the upper floors now, sometimes joined by others. A partner, eventually, then children of his own. They asked about the basement once. Caleb just smiled and said, "Some rooms are just there to remind us what not to build again." He never nailed it shut again. He never needed to. Mira's room remained untouched. It became something sacred, not in a solemn way, but like a photo album that never gathers dust. Sam showed it to his kids once, told them the truth in pieces. Not everything. Just enough for them to understand that love doesn't always survive the way we hope, but it leaves behind maps, if we're brave enough to follow. The tree they planted out front grew wild and heavy. Its roots pushed up parts of the walkway. Its leaves carpeted the yard each fall. Echo the dog had long since passed, buried under the tree, wrapped in the same autumn leaf blanket Mira once kept on her chair. The house never shook when it happened. It just sighed, softly, like it knew loss but didn't fear it anymore. Caleb sometimes sat alone in the kitchen late at night, sipping tea. Not because the house called to him, but because it was the only place in the world that had ever fully known him. All his mistakes, all his failures, all his quiet wins and unspoken apologies. It didn't hold them against him. It just held them. One night, near the end, Sam found him there again, staring out the window. "You waiting for something?" he asked. Caleb smiled without looking. "No, just listening." "To what?" Caleb turned, eyes misty, but not from sadness. "To nothing," he said. And after everything, that's a beautiful thing to hear. When Caleb passed, the house didn't shake. It didn't wail, it glowed. For one full day, it held the sun longer than the rest of the town. Its windows sparkled with warmth, as though every wall whispered a thank you. They buried him next to Echo, under the same tree. Sam didn't sell the house. He never even thought about it. Because that house wasn't just wood and drywall. It was forgiveness turned to shelter. It was grief rewritten as growth. It was the place where the scariest things they'd ever faced didn't win. And now, when Sam walks those halls, holding the hand of a child with his eyes, he knows something simple and unshakable. The house is not haunted anymore. It's healed. And in the spaces between the floorboards, in the silence behind the walls, in the attic full of sun, and the basement left untouched, you can still hear it breathe, not waiting, not warning, just being home.